All right, everyone. Welcome back to another quasi-esoteric live stream. Um, this one's going to be a little bit more of a specialized conversation here, and so I decided not to go live with it for that reason at some level because I think the chat can be a little distracting. But hopefully, we can take questions in the comments as they come up. But I want to say I am really excited for this conversation today. We're going to be diving in with an expert in the archaeology of ancient magic, which just sounds like the most Indiana Jones job ever. I'm really happy to welcome on to Esoterica Dr. Kirsten Dzwiza, who is an expert in the archaeology of ancient magic, for a conversation today about this amazing text, PGM 596 through 172, or the Stele of Jeu, the Hieroglyphist in his letter. Um, Dr. Dzwiza, thank you so much for taking the time to come on to Esoterica and really dive deep and share your expertise on this topic. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you so much for having me as a guest on your show. I'm totally excited to be here.
Wonderful. And I also just want to let folks know that Kirsten has an amazing YouTube channel on her own. I'll be linking it down in the description and in the pinned comment. If you are interested in ancient magic and the Greek magical papyri, some demotic stuff. I mean, it's amazing watching you on some of your content, looking at some demotic magical content. It's one thing to read hieroglyphics. It's one thing to read some hieratics. It's another thing to dig into the demotic. Um, that is a real, that is amazing for me. So when I had a semester of Egyptian, and I remember my professor said, "Well, if you want to get into demotics, that's a specific. You become a demoticist." Um, and that stuff is really amazing. So I really want folks to pause if you can, or at least bookmark it if you can. Go subscribe to Dr. Fitz's channel. It is a gold mine of real expertise
You.
in ancient magic, and so please go over there and check her out. Also, um, Kirsten, would you mind saying a little bit about the Kickstarter that you've started and that I'm supporting? I want folks to know that I'm so excited about this that I got in as soon as I found out about it, because I think it's going to be really one of the most helpful and just amazing pieces of literature on the practice of ancient magic. So, could you say a bit about maybe you can say a little bit about yourself and about the Kickstarter, if you don't mind?
Oh, wow, thank you. Yes, the so I study primary sources of ancient magic. That is first-hand testimony from ancient practitioners, like their ritual manuals and their artifacts. My main areas are the Egyptian, Greek, and Roman sources, dating roughly between the first century BC and the seventh century CE. And the Kickstarter was about a project I've been working on since the early 2000s, and that is compiling and cataloging the ancient magic signs. So I have about 1,000 artifacts and rituals in which they occur, and about 10,000 occurrences of these ancient magic signs. And the Kickstarter was about finishing two books, a source book of ancient magic science, so where I compile and introduce all the sources, and as far as possible with images, with photographs. And the other is the catalog of ancient magic science, so that everybody working with magic science and sigils has the chance to look up quickly if there are any ancient sources to a sign they are working with, or they are interested in, so that they can see, okay, what are the sources, and what do we know about this magic sign, and what's the literature for it. And the Kickstarter was successful. I was totally excited about that. I was really happy about the amazing support. And the project itself is over, but it's still possible, and I still do get requests, and it is still possible to like adopt an ancient magical artifact, or to name a magic sign, or basically to support the project. And the easiest way to do that is just send me a DM via Twitter, or send me an email. And thank you that you say that you find this work useful, because it's in at university there's not so many people working in this area, and no one has so far compiled these magic signs. And you do read like from some renowned academics that it would be useless to compile these signs, because many of them are meaningless. And I think it's really important to compile them, because you can't say they are meaningless until you have compiled them and looked into them, and they are by far not meaningless. So I was really happy, and I'm very thankful to you that you find this work useful.
I mean, I think it's and again, even if it's not useful in the sense of like I'm not going to use them for magical purposes or whatever, it's incredibly important. Like these were the important uh, technologies by which people performed healing and did ritual tasks in the ancient world, and to relegate them as simply meaningless or something like that, and to not to study them. I don't know. There's such a strange. Sometimes academia can have a profound anti-intellectual streak to it,
Yes.
which is just bewilderingly ironic. But I just want to thank you for that work, folks. And I hope you heard that. We're talking about thousands of magical objects and 10,000 magical signs being indexed in this work. It's just it's really an amazing piece of labor, and I just want to personally thank you for having done it. And I'm really looking forward to yeah to seeing the results.
Thank you.
So let's just maybe briefly say something about the origin of these magical signs. I get a lot of questions, and I've even done an episode which I on one of the old theories about where some of these magical signs come from, especially the ones with the lines and the ringlets that we see all over the Greek magical papyri and other texts. That one of the going theories was they were sort of uh, they were like the remains of hieroglyphs or demonic characters once people forgot how to write those texts. But I'm wondering if you're willing to give your professional opinion or speculate, either one or both, about the origins of these magical signs. How do you think what are their origins, and how do you think they might have developed?
Ooh, I'd love to. So there are a number of theories about the origin of ancient magic signs, that they originate in the Egyptian culture, in that they have a Jewish origin. Um, uh, Basically, that yeah, sorry. Basically, there's a lot of theories, but not based on really looking into um, how do you say it, a relevant number of ancient sources. So um, with the body of testimony I've compiled, it clearly looks currently that it that the origin is in the Greek culture. And
Hmm.
some indications for this are, for example, that the ancient Greek term characteris is made as a loan word, or is used as a loan word in basically all the languages in which magic signs occur in antiquity. That's demotic in Hebrew, in Latin, um, and the earliest currently known attestation of magic signs are from mainland Greece and from a mentioning in a Greek ritual manual. So and the signs were already spread over the empire, over the Roman provinces, as far as France, Germany, and even Great Britain, before they occurred for the first time in the corpus of the Egyptian and Greek magical papyri, which all derive from or were made in Egypt. So there's a few hints that say, well, that make it likely that they originate in the Greek culture. um, the Egyptians wouldn't need magic signs. If you take a look at how they were used, the Egyptians basically had their hieroglyphs, and the hieroglyphs were still present in the first century BCE and in the fourth century CE, and later, because all the monuments are still standing today, or a lot of monuments are still standing today, and that's inherent part of their culture. So the hieroglyphs were perceived as the name says, the Greek term says, as a holy, a sacred language, a sacred writing system. They were perceived by Greeks and other cultures as living signs. We get to this later again. So that this is something so special. If you take a look at as magic signs were used, you Egyptians, like it, there wouldn't have been a reason for an Egyptian practitioner, priest, magician to invent magic signs or to get the
Mm,
idea of magic signs. And it's 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 ongoing research, so it's currently difficult it probably will always be difficult to actually prove an origin. But um, in the Greek text, or in Greek context, magic signs were used as not to write something, not to write a word or a name, even though some of them do resemble Greek letters. Most of them don't, and um, in the Greek context, in early and even later Greek context, you do have ring signs, but usually it's that they are balanced with non-ring signs, like with geometrical signs or with lines, just with signs simply not displaying rings. And they are used in, for example, you have this, it's you have a character, a magic sign that is described as the sign, it's a sign of a magic sign of Kronos, for, and it bestows you with courage. um and but if you take a look at the Egyptian use, like the Coptic use of magic signs, not the very early use but the later use, in these sources we always have ring signs, and we almost only have ring signs, and these ring signs are letters, and the Copts wrote the names of higher powers with these ring signs. So it's two very different kinds of uses, of use and of understanding. So it's not an abstract symbol. It's a, for the for the Copts, basically return to the hieroglyphs. It's a sacred. It's a writing, not a writing system, but it's letters that are used especially to address higher powers. So
mm,
naming the hieroglyphs again. What's interesting is that we do have the early Coptic sources, from the so-called Gnostic books of the two books of Joy, for example, or Joy. I think Yeo. It's basically it's Ieu, but I think in English it's often said Joy. We get to this later too. And there actually Jesus teaches his pupils about magic signs. In book one, it's characteris. In book two, they are called sigils. And these are abstract signs, so they don't resemble any letter at all. And they are the signs of individual higher powers.
mhm.
So um, it's really, it's a lot of testimony we have. It's a lot of ancient sources. And yeah, figuring out a clear origin is, yeah, I think I'm talking here a bit too long now. It's not easy to say, oh well, this is the origin, but I think there are clear indications that it derives from the Greek culture, because the Greek language, or the Greek writing as itself, um, not talking about like books as the mysteries of the letters, but in general was not perceived as a sacred writing system. So among the general public. And I think the Greeks, in their, especially the Egyptian Greeks, or the Greeks living in Egypt, they had the need, or they felt they wanted something parallel to or similar to the hieroglyphs.
Mm.
So that's currently the the thoughts, the idea, what I'm looking for.
That sounds, I mean, that tracks also to examples in Jewish magic where we find ring signs, and sometimes the ring signs are semic. That is to say, they're just Hebrew versions written in the ring signs, and sometimes they're asemic. They're just strings of characters that we don't recognize as being related to the Hebrew language, which is interesting because Jewish magic often considers Hebrew to be itself also a sacred language, and yet sometimes they also use ring signs in things like some of the papyri found at the Ibn Ezra synagogue, but also as late as texts like the Sefer Raziel that published in Amsterdam in the 18th century.
Yes, and now imagine you're a Greek practitioner, priest, magician, and you're surrounded by Egyptians and by Jews having their holy language and you don't. So I wonder what that does with your mind, with your mindset,
Hmm.
and with your ritual. What kind of influence that has? So basically, you could say it's likely that the magic science, the practice of embedding magic science into your ritual practice is Greek in origin, but the inspiration for this is likely it's I think it's both. It's Egyptian and it's Jewish.
Interesting. Yeah, it's a fascinating. Again, it shows you the strange melting pot of sort of ancient Alexandria,
Yes.
where this and then how that culture gets exported back, right? It gets exported back to the Copts, it gets exported back to the Jews, it gets exported back into European and Arabic magic, talismanic magic, and how these. And one of the things I always point out is the incredible success of the imagery, especially of the ring signs, and how they persist all the way down till contemporary occultism, and how it's just amazing that system of magical writing broadly construed, has just proven to be incredibly powerful for the better part of 2 millennia or more. It's a very powerful testimony to how ideas and imagery can persist down through the
Yes.
ages with a great
Yes.
deal of cultural connectivity.
And when you say cultural melting pot, um, what I what I sometimes miss in academic publications is that the focus on that at 30 BC, Egypt became a Roman province.
Mhm.
So the melting pot increased. I mean, Egypt was the how do you say that was the heart for the production of wheat. No, oh God, no, don't take this out. This is wrong. Getreide. Wait, I have to con
I think it was wheat and I mean grain in general. That was where the was the
granary.
breadbasket of the Roman Empire. Yeah,
Granary. The dictionary
yeah.
says granary. So Egypt was the granary of the Roman Empire, and there was so much exchange in is it be it military, be it trade, be it people traveling with military or trade, and intellectuals traveling there. There is so much additional input, intellectual input.
Mhm.
So the Greco-Roman Alexandria is already considered to be a melting pot of cultures and ideas and intellectual thought and exchange. And now Egypt becomes Roman Empire, and is I think this it must have been well probably difficult too or dangerous for some, but basically on an intellectual from an intellectual perspective, it must have been incredible to have lived at this
Mhm.
time.
No, I always tell people I'm not a romantic about the past, but if I could go back and spend a week, where I could
Yeah.
speak the language and not die of a disease, I would love to walk around ancient Alexandria with Zosimus of Panopolis and get the
Wow.
tour get the tour of the lay of the land and the intellectual world from someone like him or Ammonius Saccas. But really, I think Zosimus of Panopolis would be the person that if I could have a uh, some Egyptian beer with and with drink it with the straws or whatever. That's who I would. That's who I'd want to do it with.
Awesome.
So, uh, we don't get to drink our beers through straws often enough, but in ancient Egypt, you could. Um, um, So we're going to be zooming in today on the a specific text in the Greek Magical Papyri. Um, Kirsten, would you mind just sort of summarizing briefly what that body of literature or literatures is? This is a thing that often I think is important to point out that the Greek Magical Papyri is not a homogeneous collection. It's a lot of stuff that we all group together in one book's published in one volume, but it's actually a relatively heterogeneous collection. Could you say a little bit about what's in there and what that is, and any defining features that that you think people should especially know that don't get enough attention?
I think the first thing that comes to my mind is to point out that it's a 20th century compilation. So it's not an ancient compilation of texts. It's actually a compilation um, that the German scholar Karl Preisendanz, well, he gathered, met the published magical papyri, and published them as this body, what we today know as the Greek Magical Papyri, in 1928, 1931. And he even had a third volume with an index of all the names of higher powers, but this was destroyed during World War II. But a few years ago, the manuscript itself survived, and a few years ago, a copy was made available online for free. So if you're interested in the names of the higher powers and looking up where they occur in the Greek magic papyri, you can download this third volume. But basically, the Greek magical papyri are a modern compilation, and the origin text date between the 1st century BC and the 6th century CE, and um, they have, do you say succinctly? So the Preisendan started, I think he published 81 magical papyri. And this is a combination of manuals and artifacts from applied ritual practice. And I think Betts in 1986 edited the first English translation of this corpus of the Greek magical papyri, and I think most people still use Betts, the Greek magical papyri. And I think in there's about 130 texts. So he added some that were published in between the Preisendanz compilation in 1986. And by now, there much more magical papyri have been published. And I think it's Chris Pharaon and Sophie Tovalis. This awesome. I don't know her name. So let's say it's Chris Pharaon, who is editing a total new version, editing and including new text. So, what else? What's maybe important is the question: why were these texts compiled in this group? Because it's not that they were an ancient corpus that someone found 100 papyri in Thebes or somewhere else. It was a decision by Karl Preisendanz to choose these texts, and the reason he did this is because they haven't been or these specific texts were, up until the mid and later 20th century, regarded as of low intellectual quality. There were the religious texts, and they were like royalty, glamour. That's really like oh, we have the pyramid text, we have the coffin text, and myths, and then there was the magical text, and the magical texts were like, oh my god, it's all the gods, and the people do evil things, and they believe they can control the gods. So Preisendanz, even when he gave his first course oh god, his first course at university, he wasn't allowed to call it magic. He just had to call it religious texts, because magic or the magical papyri were associated with, like, it's the worst people. It's how do you say it? Do you say scum? Like,
Yeah, like, it's also like embarrassing, right? Like we think
yes,
of the Greeks and the Romans and the Egyptians as being this sort of high sophisticated culture, and then we
yeah.
have this mound of literature that's like, "Ugh, what do we do with this?" So it's an
So
embarrassment at some level too. And who wants to stake their academic career on a historical embarrassment?
exactly, that was the mindset at that time. And at the time Preisendanz compiled the papyri, there were already some monographs and more work on this on the ancient on the sources of ancient magic, especially the curse tablets were edited quite well. Um, but still, at the beginning, the Greek magical papyri, that was a corpus of a body of, you know eh, the uninteresting downsides and all the negative aspects of all the cultures, in opposite to this glorious, great, golden cultures, Egypt, Greece, and their religions and what they've achieved. So, but luckily, Preisendens helped a lot with his edition of the Greek Magic Papyri to provide access to the texts. You know that more scholars could actually get into what is really written in the Magical Papyri, because I mean we are at 1928, 1931. There's no internet. It was really difficult to get photographs at all. I had a look at the Preisendans archive, and he basically, you know, he had low resolution black and white images to work with. It's totally different from today. So what he did by publishing these books and the text, he offered other scholars the opportunity to start their own research. And luckily, by now, we're at a point where it's clear that what's written in these Greek magical papyri, the content of the Greek magical papyri, this is this is how do you say it? Highly intellectual. You know, this is, you had to have such an incredible knowledge of all kind of all kinds of religions and beliefs and concepts of thought, schools of thought, to actually write one of these rituals. Yes,
Mhm.
there's so much knowledge s- of so many things in there, be it astronomical. Oh, that's good. Astrological knowledge, be it knowledge of not only gods, but also of how these gods were perceived in different places. Because you know, you go to Lower Egypt, and Re and Amun are perceived differently than in Upper Egypt. You know, it's it can change dramatically in if you just go a couple of hundred kilometers to the north, south, east, or west. And having all this knowledge and you have to have all this knowledge and an understanding of much older ritual practice for being able to conduct the rituals, to understand the rituals that preserved in these Greek magical papyri. So today we're at a point where it's not that magic is all the stupid or the evil or what we don't want to know about humankind and what humans are capable of. I mean, of course, there are very dark texts, very dark rituals, very dark approaches and ideas. But when we talk as academics, when we talk about these texts, we can't just judge them by our prejudices. You know, you have to use your brain and look into what they say to decide and to classify them. And this is one of the reasons why modern scholarship struggled so much with the use of the term magic. So it's an ongoing debate which has increased during the last basically 5 or 10 years. And many scholars try not to use the term magic anymore, but instead using the term ritual power.
Mhm.
So to try to get away from, because magic still has for many people they has a negative connotation, and calling it ritual power, it's more neutral, and it opens the way for more people maybe to get into the material by themselves, a bit less biased.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think also part of what I really like about reading and studying the PGM is that we get a glimpse a little bit more of what religion was like on the ground, so to speak. That
Yes.
a lot of these texts were composed by people a bit lower down on the social economic spectrum, at least to some degree. And we get some degree of what religion looked like in more day to day practice, where we tend to think of religion as what priests do in temples, as opposed to no, religion's a much broader spectrum. And this is one dimension of that spectrum, not higher or lower, but one dimension of it. And it's just as much part of the religious practice of ancient peoples as taking sacrifices to a temple, or saying, what we might think with orthodox prayers, or et cetera, et cetera. And so I really love these texts because they are they're kind of an important corrective for all of us who've all what we read were the pyramid text or the papyrus of Ani, or these kinds of texts. They give us an important corrective to the more centralized and more upper crust versions of what religion was supposed to be. This gives us sort of the maybe a glimpse more onto the religion of the streets.
I think a core difference to, an important difference to what you said is like the pyramid text or the coffin text is that in the Greco-Roman period, it's the everyday people. I mean, it's still the elite too, but it's also the everyday people getting access to
Mhm.
magical practice, or to the up and downsides to the benefits, basically, when they go as clients to a practitioner and can ask for someone to perform magic to their benefit. And I wonder if it's really, or the other way. I think it's a good chance that it's priests and people having a high ranking. How do you say, are socially, on top, belonging to the elite. Do you say elite? Elite.
Elite, yeah.
Elite. Um, that practice magic, or rather, it's like basically everyone having access, potentially having access to magic, is potentially everyone being able to practice magic in a
Mhm.
more or less in intellectual or learned way. But if you take a look at the pyramid text, that was restricted to Pharaoh and the royal family. Family. Sorry, family. And the coffin text, you have you're in the middle age, the middle kingdom, middle age, in the middle kingdom, you got the people from high ranking people from administration got access to these privileges that only royalty, also pharaohs and their families had during the old kingdom with the pyramid text. So I think this is a development, and we see
Mhm.
that in the Greek magical papyri, we see that as well, for the practitioners as well as the clients come from all, I say, from all paths of life.
Right, right. Yeah, I think, yeah, that's an important point. And we hear sometimes it's talked about the transition from the pyramid text to the coffin text to the the dozens and dozens of examples of the Book of Coming Forth by Day, which they just found
Mhm.
a really long one recently. Just announced, at least they found a really new one
The
at
50,
Saqqara, I think.
yeah.
Yeah, it's huge. Which is funny because it was paralleled with the runic text that just published as well, which is all of 6 or 7 letters, and they just found a 15-meter long Egyptian text at the same time. So it's funny that what gets media coverage, and what how that media coverage gets pumped out. But yeah, the idea of the democratization of ritual power and the democratization of the power of the gods, either to grant you an afterlife or to do things in this life. That idea of that democratization, the rise of literacy, the rise of access to ritual power. Those are really interesting topics, I think, um, in the development of specifically the Alexandrian context.
I
Are
mean,
there any texts in the PGM that really jump out to you that you find to be sort of perennial favorites? I mean, I'll cop out and say that one that jumps out to me is the so-called Mithras liturgy. I find that to be an endlessly fascinating um, text. But are there any lesser known texts, or any texts that you would recommend people say, hey, this is sort of the deep cut Greek magical papyrus that you haven't taken a look at, or another text beside the PGM5 we'll look at today. But any other texts that you think of are especially favorites, or interesting, or one do you think people should check out they may have not seen yet?
I think it's so basically, me personally, I love texts that provide more background information about ancient magic and the people that used magic, like but when there's information about encryptions, or or
Mm,
if you have like the Eighth Book of Moses, where you have actually testimony for the use of steganography, so hidden writing. And but what I would recommend, that sounds a bit arrogant, I always think, but what I would what I think is really exciting, to read texts, to read ritual instructions in a way as if you want to perform them, because so many rituals, if you read them step by step, line by line, you realize they are contradictory, that they're contradictory information. Like you got one famous one in PGM 36, the Oslo Papyrus, where you have to draw a figure, this holding a hat in his one hand, and if you read the text, it's, or at least the translation, it's very different from what the figure looks like. So if you look at the original text, the thing with the head might become more clear, but basically you have very often this difference between the written word and the given image, or even between the text, then there are instructions you have to do, and you try to reconstruct them, and then you're at a certain point and you think, wait, why am I supposed to take this lamp now, because it's supposed to stand somewhere over there, or I already prepared it, and this is what I think, what I would like to talk about, to people much more, the not like how cool this is or how great this is, but how this the process of writing these ritual instructions, you always hear they are copied, they were copied from earlier texts, or people received, or people went somewhere and to someone else and then copied this. But actually, if you take a look, not at Betts, because Betts is plain translation with hardly any comments to the original text, but the original texts are full of comments, like on the side, above the lines, in the lines, and there are lines crossed out and words crossed out, and this, you really see how, or you get the idea how people practiced, and then corrected what they wrote down based on their experiences. And
mhm.
this is awesome. So I would recommend people, you know, read Betts. It's fine. It's great to get an idea, but so many of the manuscripts are online. You can get the images, you can see them online for free, and so you don't have to pay any fees to get the images anymore. And if you take a look at the original manuscripts, you get a totally different idea, and new thoughts, and a new feeling about these rituals.
Mhm.
Yes. So I think that many of them are not just plain copies from a template or something like that, but they are actually based on experience. And this is exciting.
I totally agree with you, and this is one of the things that I've always thought of as a really interesting line of research is sort of forensic understanding of these texts, in the sense of what does it look like if we try to stage them again, whether it's
Yes.
actual modern ritual practitioners staging them for their own ritual reasons, or just academics being like, "How did you do this? Like, how did this actually work?" Um, and yeah, this is a thing that also I'm also attentive to is the manuscripts are so important in all this, and that was why it was really important for me when I made the episode on the Akephalos and the so-called bornless
Yes.
ritual to look at the actual manuscript and see like, oh, there's a Cairo like right there at the top of the manuscript that is not in the Betts, um, and to show also there's also super linear text on the I think the third folio of the text.
That's the name.
Yeah.
It's the
Uh,
name with the
uh,
100 letters.
the tiny little cramped handwriting at the top, and it's not reproduced in Betts, and it's
Yeah.
I couldn't make heads or tails of exactly what was going on up there, but it was clearly in a different hand than the rest of the text, and I'm like, you know, really for me it was really important, and I folks know that I'm a calligrapher, and seeing a text versus seeing a text, even with a really good critical apparatus, you're still not seeing the same thing.
Yes.
And I don't know about you, but one of the things that I really find frustrating about the Betts is that his critical apparatus, when he's dealing with this with the so-called nomina barbara, the names, a lot of those so-called barbarous names, he does not separate between words that we know and words that we don't know, or words that we have really relatively relatively smart speculation about what they might mean. Um, they're just sort of all there in all caps, and I feel like that's again the apparatus he uses. Why I appreciate the fact that he went through the effort of trying to give us some sense of when the text switches to Coptic or when something's going on like that. I do feel like the critical apparatus that Betts uses could be pretty dramatically improved.
Yes, so that's why, especially to people who embed ancient magic into their own actual magic and their rituals, and they usually rely on the translations in bets. And it's like the translation is okay, or the translations are okay if you just want to get an idea of, what's ancient magic, what am I dealing here with, what are we talking about. But if you go into the details, I mean, of course it's a translation, it's not a critical edition. So
Hmm.
I'm happy about the comment that there are any notes at all. But looking at the Nomina Barbara, he they are all written in, how do you say it, in capitals,
Yeah, in all caps. Yep.
all caps. They're written in all caps. And one thing you can't see is that in many of the ancient texts, these names are actually separated by dots or small diagonal lines and or markers. In the Demotic Papyri, they are most of the time even separated by red dots, so written in
Mm.
black and black ink, but the separators are written in red. So you got thick red dots to make clear where they start and where they end. You often don't have that really clear in bets, and bets doesn't in bets. If you like, I'm currently translating the London Leiden Demotical Magical Papyrus, which is
Mm.
known as PGM and PDM 14, because it has some lines in Greek as well. And you can see that in bets there are different editors. Most of it, the demotic part is made by Jackson, but O'Neill and others do the Greek parts, and they write the same name, so written in the demotic and in the Greek, basically in the same way. The demotic always has a Greek supralinear editions to ensure the right pronunciation. They are differently transcribed by different authors in bets. So
Mm.
this is a problem too, and it's often not clear that the demotic text has the advantage over the Greek, that you have a determinative,
Right.
determinative at the end of the names of higher powers. So you
Right.
basically, it's easier to see that it's actually perceived as a name of a higher power. And this is not given in or marked in bets as well. So just some of the few. Bets makes a lot of
Yeah.
use of the term magic, for example, as well. And a lot of ancient technical terms get not translated. They get, like, it's a nice, comfortable English term is used for this, and sometimes even different terms for the same Greek term. And these technical terms would be relevant for academics as
Mhm.
well as for practitioners.
Right. Yeah. Mageia and Goes are very different Greek terms. Um, like you cannot just conflate Goes and Mageia or these kinds of terms that really had very technical valences um, in the ancient in ancient magic or in even medieval magic. And so yeah, those terms get conflated often, and that's really
Yeah.
so
Sorry.
yeah. Go ahead.
Take the term magic in the Betts translation. It's like magic, spell, charm. You read it all the time. The term mageia and related terms only occurs about 4 times in the Greek Magical Papyri.
Mm.
So all the other times, it's different words that get translated as magic. So basically, if you rely on the translation, and Preisendanz is just as bad there. If you rely on the translations, you don't get the chance to learn about the many different concepts underlying what we basically call magic, and what makes the Greek magical papyri the Greek magical papyri. So all these concepts, you don't know that they exist because all you read is magic,
Right.
charm, spell.
No, that's yeah. Yeah. It's more again. It's the text like the Präsendants and the Bets are great starts, and they're certainly important foundation stones that will be eventually superseded by another generation of scholarship. And that's the thing too, is that people have to realize that scholarship takes time. It's hard work.
Yes.
I, you have nothing but my condolences having to translate things from Demotic, and
I love it. It's
it.
absolutely awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in awe of people, people who work in Demotic. I mean, so I took a semester of Middle Egyptian, and you get to where you can read really, a lot of the really uh, choreographed texts that are relatively easy to work through. And I remember having to work through something in just hieratics from, I think it was a Papyrus V, which is a relatively clear text, all things told. And when you get down to the Demotic text, it's just like I can't tell this squiggle from that squiggle. It's amazing. Um,
When I learned demotic by accident, actually, and I jumped
Quote of
in.
the day.
I jumped into this course because I was curious, and I got the first, how do you say it, referat. So the first talk in Germany was like, when you have a class at university, you have to give a talk in some kind of way. So um, and I got the first talk. That means I had to learn demotic pretty quickly, and which of course didn't really work. But my first idea, or the first idea my brain came up with, what it's like to read or to learn demotic, the demotic science, is like, I used to do it to do role playing tabletop, you know,
Oh yeah.
Dungeons and Dragons and things
Oh,
like that.
I
And I
still do.
thought, oh yeah, awesome. And I thought, well, all I need is like 10 dices with 20 sides. And I draw signs on them because they all look the same. And I just,
Mhm.
and then I put letters next to them and I just roll the dices and make something up. Because, the first time I saw them, I thought, it's just all lines. It's just, how can they mean anything different when they all look the same?
It's really challenging. I mean, it's like you have to know what it's saying before you get to it. I don't know. Uh, but yeah, the guys, the recent translation of the Demotic Book of Thoth, just looking through their notes and how they rendered it and the difficulty of that text, how fragmentary it is. It just I'm just in awe of that scholarship and so deeply appreciative of it.
But
Um,
you know what's so amazing, if you got the chance to, I mean, you learn the language and you learn every day, you work with the language. It's like in real life. You can learn from the books, but basically you learn the language and the idioms. Do you say idioms?
mhm.
Yeah. Um when you actually talk to native speakers. So we can't do that, but we do have the papyri. So working with these original texts and looking at how how the people express themselves. I mean, there's so many times when I spend hours in front of my monitor just staring and thinking, you must make sense, you must make sense, please tell me, what do you mean? And it does. But it's in so many occasions, and you read a bit further and then you realize something, and then you get back and know, oh well, okay, this is what must have been meant there. And it's so different from reading a translation,
Mm,
because you're into the text and you kind of get into the heads of the people who wrote this, and actually had to make the decision, what do I write, what do I not write, and how do I write it.
mhm.
And so yeah, sorry, little excursion here, but yeah, I think
No,
it's
it's
totally incredible to work with the original text.
no, it's yeah. I when in the cases I have, not with demonic obviously, but other text, yeah, it's um yeah, yeah, you get to hear them talk, which is neat. Like
Yes, right, exactly.
um yeah, and I imagine it's much different with demotic, which is much closer to how they spoke compared to the very rote text that you often learn to read if you're in sort of a beginning level Egyptian. You're reading these very highly formulaic texts, which by the time we get to the time of the Greek magical papyri, no one spoke like that anymore. Um, and I think in the Demotic, you get to hear them talk, which is a very different kind of
Yes, and
yeah,
comment. Get to hear them
yeah,
comment. It's really awesome. Yeah.
yeah. That is so fascinating. Let's dive into the text of the day. And this is PGM 596 through 172, the Stele. And I guess what I want to do, and maybe to whatever degree my episode will serve as a kind of introduction to it. I imagine no one's watching this who hasn't watched the episode on the Stele yet. If you haven't, you may want to go watch that first because we're going to dive pretty deep into this. But I wanted to kind of get your take on this. To me, when I've read this ritual, it's always struck me as several rituals kind of combined together. And I could be totally wrong about this, but I've never gotten the. It seems like a very um, stitched together text. That it may have been several texts that have been stitched together at some point as we have it now. But I was wanting to get your sense of what do you think the origins of this text are? Do you think it was always one coherent text, or was it several texts stitched together? That's sort of my intuition, or what are your thoughts on the possible origins of this of the stele here?
Yeah. Okay. So to answer this question, I think it might be really interesting to our audience to walk through this text step by step. Would that be okay with you?
Oh, absolutely, please.
Okay, so PGM 5 is a 4th century, approximately a 4th century ritual manual from Egypt. And the ritual we're talking here is the Stele of Yoi, the Zographos. And that's how it starts, Stele of Yeu, the Zographos. And Zographos is literally one who paints from life or from nature, or it's a life painter with Zoa meaning hieroglyphs. So, and then it starts. I call upon you, the Headless One, who created earth and heaven, who created night and day. You who created light and darkness. You are Osiris. And now Osiris, when and never, means Osiris who is good or beautiful. In Coptic, it's Wenofre. And whenever or coalesced, is that coalesced with Osiris. So Osiris is attested with the epithet. Do you say epithet?
Hmm.
Epithet. In Deutsch, it's
Epithet.
epithet. Okay, thank you. With the epithet Usir Wenen Nefer, so Osiris or Nofris, in the temple of Amun of Hebes. And there is a stele of Zahi, some Kosai, from Abydos, dated to the Middle Kingdom. It starts with Hail Osiris Hontamenti. On this beautiful day on which he appeared in his name Ka of the West, Wenen Nefer. So basically, here we do have how do you say it? Two melted deities. So Osiris, mainly Osiris, the headless one is identified with. So
Hmm.
then it continues, whom no one has ever seen. And we get to this interesting part in a moment. You are Yabas, you are Yapos. So here we have two names, and it's difficult to say where they come from or who is addressed because there are no parallels. We could try to trace them back to Greek meaning, media meaning like voice, for example. But it's not really easy. So for the moment, I would say we leave this at it's two names. We can't really interpret currently. So that then it continues. Thou hast separated the just and the unjust. Thou hast created female and male. Thou hast revealed seed and fruits. Thou hast made that men love one another and hate one another. So here we have praise in the form of a hymn to the Creator God. And ancient Egyptian uh, in ancient Egyptian myth or religious beliefs, Atum is the creator deity for the Enneads of Heliopolis in Lower Egypt. He created Shu, who is air, and Tefnut, who is fire. And here's a misunderstanding often in the English text, because there are a number of um, German, sorry, it's not in English, it's only German publications from the early of the 21st century, so early 2000s, where it was where the evidence was compiled, and solid arguments were provided that Tefnut is not moisture but fire, but you still
Mm,
have Tefnut as being moisture in popular scientific English publications. So and they then created Geb, who is earth, and Nut, who is sky, and then they created Osiris, Isis, Seth, and Nephthys. And the Osiris myth is an extension to this cosmogony of the Enneads of Heliopolis. It's emphasizing the interrelation between rulership and creation. So Atum is the all, the completeness, but he's also at the same time the opposite, the nothing and the nothingness. Let's dig a bit deeper into the beginning of this creation, and have a look at the coffin text spell 261. It's a side note, but I think it might be interesting to our audience. And I have a translation here. So this is a charm to become the god Heka, and it says, I am indeed the son of him who gave birth to the universe, the all, who was born before his mother yet existed. I am the protection of that which the unique God has ordained. I am he who caused the Aeneid to live. For to me belonged the universe before you gods had yet come into being. And so, what there's a lot of really interesting aspects here, but one is like this identity thing is very Egyptian. I am, you are.
mhm.
So and this hymn like is very typical. And what's really interesting here is that we have Heka as the god of magic, basically being the one who was born. uh, he is calls himself this the son of him. So he's Heka is directly connected to creation. So and side information, and we just move on, and everything. I do have your questions in mind.
Mhm.
It continues. The text continues with, "I am Moses, your prophet, to whom you gave your mysteries, which are celebrated by Israel." So here we have this identification with a powerful, renowned person from the past, and this was really common in ancient magic. Identification was also used as a justification to call upon a higher power, and as a claim of eligibility. How this is the term, eligibility to be heard. So then the text says, "You brought to light the moist and the dry, and every nourishment. Hear me." And then continues, "I am the angel."
Just one question. Do you think there's anything to the misspelling of Israel there, of Israel? Is that a common spelling, or do you think that's a misspelling, or do you think there's anything significant about the introduction of that extra T in there?
No, I can't. I wonder if it's potentially philologically based, so that you can say, depending on the specific dialect the person spoke or used, because we have the we have an oral transmission. Might it be there, might it be? I know it is not the only occurrence, but I'm not a specialist in this, so
Mm.
I'm really sorry if I can't say more to this part. um
Yeah, I was just curious
um so but I keep that in mind, I write that down.
because it's interesting. I think in the manuscript you do see the diatheres or whatever above there. That it's clearly a scribe who knows what the word is, and that's the way it's commonly spelled in Greek. But it's interesting that they add that extra T in there. And I was just wondering. I was trying to think of anywhere in other Greek magical papyri where it gets spelled that way,
You know,
because it's just a it's a I think it does get spelled that way in some other places. It's just a curious spelling.
you know, I looked that up. I looked that up, and maybe you can put it in the under the video, or somewhere as an addition. Is in the PGM, because now I'm curious too. So the text continues then with "I am the angel of Fapro Ozonophris," and the Bet's translation says messenger, which is
Mhm.
technically correct, but in other occasions you see angel translated. So, and if you're not familiar with Greek, you you may not know that angel means actually messenger. So I think it's better to translate "I am the angel of Papro Ozonophris," and Papro is very likely Pharaoh. So Pa in Egyptian. So here the practitioner um, becomes a messenger. I think this is really interesting, of likely a pharaoh, which might indicate or tap in the close relation between kingship rulership, the deities of the Aeneid, and here especially Osiris, and the creation of the world. So identifying with a deceased pharaoh establishes a direct connection to the creator god, since pharaoh and the creator god had, based on Egyptian belief, a direct connection. So thus identifying with pharaoh provides again the justification for, or the justified right of the practitioner to call upon the god and to receive an answer. So identity was of major importance, in, like we've seen already in the coffin text of the Middle Kingdom. It and it has to do with the Egyptian concept and longing for completeness. So
Mhm.
it is also used to establish who is calling upon the gods. And in magic, in syncretistic based magic, and I think I should say that this is mostly a theory so a theory I have. So it's not written in stone somewhere. Um, is to potentially establish or even draw on the powers and competences of those you identify with.
Mm.
So the next, the text continues with, "This is your true name, which was delivered to the prophet of Israel. Hear me." And now we got the first sequence of what in scholarship is often called Vocus Magicae, which is actually a series of names. And then continues with a demand: "Hear me and turn away this demon." So now we know what he wants, what the practitioner wants.
Mhm.
"I call upon you, the one in the presence of empty air, wind, or breath." The Greek term means all of it basically. "The mighty and unseen God." And breath, like empty breath, doesn't seem to make much sense here from a modern perspective and understanding of the term. But think of the breath of life. So empty air or breath could indicate the nothingness before the creation, when there was no life yet. So we would have another hint to the Aeneid and the cosmogony of Heliopolis. So then we have names again. And then the text continues with "Holy Headless. Free the NN." NN is always like, you can fill in name here. "From the demon by which he is possessed." And then names again, and among them those we know quite well because they occur very often: Abrasax and Adonai. And then it continues: "Strong Headless. Free the NN from the demon by which he is possessed." So we have another epithet of the Headless One in this invocation, and this is strong. And in Egyptian invocations, being strong is a widespread epithet. We have, e.g., the Ka-nechet, the strong Ka, or the strong bull, which occurs very often. And then we have names again, and among them Abraos. And then again, "Free the NN." And here we got the name of the one that has to be freed or is supposed to be freed. By the invoked deity. So then we have names again, among them Isaac, Sabaoth, and Iao. And then suddenly the text changes. It is not you, but here it is then, he is the Lord of gods. He is the Lord of the inhabited earth. He's the one whom the winds fear. He is the one who has made everything with the command of his word. Lord, King, ruler, helper. And this all is again relatable. I say relatable, so it's not clear, but it can be related to Atum and the cosmogony um, of Heliopolis. And then the text says, save the soul, and again names. And then now, God, angel, or good angel of the God, another epithet of the Headless One, and again names. And this is something I owe to you. I haven't seen this before, because when we talked about um, me being guest here on your show, I translated this text new, and I structured it. I always like to structure content um, visually. So it is common in ancient ritual practice to call upon a higher power that then is demanded to connect with another higher power. The practitioner himself seemingly can't connect with directly himself. So you've got this kind of, here's the practitioner, and then there is like a messenger, higher power, to actually transmit your message to the higher power involved, here being the Headless One. So basically, for the transmission of the words of the practitioner and the demand or demands to the higher power called upon, an intermediary or a messenger is needed. So the names here could be, because in this text, if you structure it, you always have a demand followed by names, a demand followed by names, a demand followed by names. And these could be the names of these messengers, which are to establish a connection to the Headless One. So, like you write a letter to someone, but you need someone to deliver it. And I think I haven't never seen it this clear, that you actually do have the demand, and then followed by what is commonly called magic words or something, and it is actually in the ancient texts addressed as onoma or nomata, meaning names. And so the text then continues, I'm the headless demon with the feet in with the feet I have side, or in the feet I have side. And in I wonder, in PGM 12 in 243, we read, the sky, Uranus, is your head, the ether your body, the earth your feet. And I wonder in this context, if the description in the feet I have side could be understood symbolically, that he has his eyes on earth in the realm of the humans, realm of the humans. But I'm not sure yet what exactly this would indicate or mean. I just found this interesting. And then it says, I'm the strong one who has the immortal fire. And I really wondered a lot about this context of the immortal fire, until I found a passage from the Greek philosopher Heraclitus. I don't know how you say it in English. Heraclit?
Yeah, Heraclitus.
Heraclitus is actually 5th century BCE, and he influenced like Plato and Porphyr, and Porphyrius.
Yeah,
Okay,
porphyry.
and he wrote that, and I quote this from a text publication by Stavros Baloyannis in his paper, The Philosophy of Heraclitus Today. The immortal fire is the underlying principle of all things, the productive power of generating everything. The heavenly fire nourishes growth and maintains everything. And in this context, we would again have a direct connection to the cosmogony, to a creator context. Um,
I wonder if the Greek is the same as porta thanaton, like the way it is in the the Greek magical power. I wonder if the turn of phrase in Heraclitus is the same as it is
Oh,
um,
see,
here.
there you got me. That's a really great point because I didn't look at the original text. Do you really think this is different?
I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of different ways of saying eternal or immortal in Greek, and it's always conspicuous when you have an exact turn of phrase in two places.
Oh,
There's just so many different ways to say immortal, and here it's at least in the Greek, it's porathanaton, the fire that does not die.
exactly. But this is really a good point. See, I didn't think of this. This is something I will look up to. What we know about, yeah, what's there, so to say, in the manuscript, on how the manuscripts are actually dated. Because I look so much for this, the concept of immortal fire. I am the strong one, yes. Who has the immortal fire, or who is the immortal fire? um I thought of the sun as well, if this is a reference to the sun, and then here to Ra, and in a way to Atum, then again. Okay, but another note, looking this up too. So, but then we continue. The text continues with, "I am the truth," and that is potentially mad. "I am who hates that injustice happens in the cosmos. I am the lightning maker and the thunder maker." And this is really weird because this is usually a reference to Seth, the lightning maker and the thunder
Mhm.
maker, storms and things. So I am the one whose sweat is the rain that falls on the earth to inseminate it. And according to Egyptian myth, humans were created from the tears of Atum. So that would be another reference. And then I am the one whose mouth sets on fire completely. I am the one who begets and destroys. And here we have Atum again. I am the grace of Ion, and I found this really interesting too, because Ion is the Hellenistic deity of the concept of a perpetual cyclic time, of eternity, and thus of the zodiac. And in Platonism, I think the Ion becomes the notion for the order and time of the universe. Now, that would be an opposite to Seth.
Right. And that sense is also taken over in the so-called Gnostic texts as well.
The next section is, "My name is a heart entwined with a serpent." And I think this one is really awesome because the name is given as a picture, so not in letters. And as names are usually given in the PGM. And what do heart and serpent mean here? To me, it sounds like also like steganography, like a hidden encoded writing, like in the Eighth Book of Moses. So it could be that this sentence has an additional layer of meaning next to the meaning of the heart and the snake as symbols themselves, in that it encrypts the sound of the name. So is the serpent a symbol of rejuvenation, taking up again the concept of a perpetual cyclic time, or as a protector of the heart? And the heart in Egyptian thought was the seat of thought, intelligence, memory, wisdom, and even, how do you say, being brave. Um, the heart was the key to afterlife. And the Ib heart, the Egyptians had two sort of hearts. The Ib heart was that one that was weighed against the feather of Maat. And then there was the Khati heart. Um, and what about the heart? So, um, well, I have to focus on what I want to say. Um, the hearty heart is written almost identically to Chat, which means first, or beginning, geographically as well as chronologically. And ancient Egyptians enjoyed wordplays, and maybe we have an additional layer of meaning here, that the heart is for something like the first. Um, and but I'm not really sure about this. It's just an idea. Um, and but let's take another look at the snake. So one of the manifestations of Atum is, in reference to its earth and primordial nature, actually a snake. And we have in the Book of the Dead, or actually more literally, Coming Forth by Day, spell or chapter 175. And that is the dialogue between Atum and Osiris. It's a lengthier text in which Osiris asks Atum at one point, what is my time in life? And Atum answers, a time of many million years are suitable for you. But I will destroy everything what I have created. This land, Egypt, will come back into the noon, into the flood, according to its origin. It is I who will remain together with Osiris after I have taken the form of another serpent, which the people do not know and the gods cannot see. So here we have a much older source, the Book of the Dead, and we have one potential explanation for the snake, but also for the reference to the unseen god in the invocation. We would have a direct connection to the sentence ahead. Also, I am the one who begets and destroys. So Atum has an epithet for his manifestation as a snake, which is Hün. So the name could be reading something like Chati Hün or Hün if you take the word for heart and the epithet of Atum as a snake. But this is at the current state of research just an assumption. So and that's important to keep in mind. I'm just totally fascinated by how many potential um, connections you have to Egyptian conception and to older Egyptian myth and religious tradition in this entire invocation, but especially here in this one sentence.
Yeah, and you get the
So
sense that so much of this is very overdetermined. That that the writer here is not doing one thing.
yeah,
There are multiple layers of of what's going on here. Symbolic. I mean, the idea of the heart encircling the snake encircling the heart also brings to mind the image of the Ouroboros, which is
yes,
also features in the
yes,
PGM quite frequently, and some in alchemical literature also produced in Egypt as well. And so one also, at least to me, the image of the the snake encircling it, the snake has to go all the way around it. The snake would have to come back to its tail.
yes. Um, I was wondering if the description refers to the Ouroboros, like because the Ouroboros is always a circle, or it's more like you know s- mm, winding around. Do you say winding around the
Mhm, mhm.
heart? You mean you know what I mean? So in this in yeah, not in a circle, but in an additional dimension. Um, yes, we can see that this pretty short sentence potentially radiates or taps into a number of myths and meanings. And I wonder if this complexity, just what you said, was exactly the point or goal of the author. And so I'm
And to be clear, the fact that this makes a very strong impression on you and may have been a very powerful idea back in antiquity. The name of the in fact the this phrase, the I am the heart encircled by a serpent, that actual name gets taken up into contemporary occultism as well. That also made a huge imprint on Aleister Crowley, who will later redevelop this ritual in a contemporary context, and he actually renames it as a subname, that exact name. So it also made a huge impression on modern people as well. It's a very evocative image, of course. One could even argue, if one were into getting a tattoo or something, that it would be a pretty
awesome
cool
idea.
tattoo. The hieroglyph of heart, ib, or khati
Yeah.
with
Yes.
that would be a not that I'm a tattoo person or whatever, but uh, if I saw someone with that tattoo, I would want to talk to them.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. I totally agree. I signed this. Um, so now we already come to the final sentence of the invocation. Come forth and follow. So that's the final demand, and the invocation is done at this point. So and what follows now is ritual directions, and that's very common structure. That at the end of the ritual instruction you have information about the kind of acts and performance you have to do. So it says consecration of the present practice. Write the name on new papyrus and extend it from your one temple to the other. And if you rely on bets, you got exactly this sentence and nothing else. There's only a comment that says the term onoma apparently refers to a formula containing a number of magical words. What is not mentioned in bets is a side note in the papyrus saying see top. referring to the name, and we talked about it briefly earlier, referring to the name written above the instruction on this page. And this is a vowel, sorry, I'm never sure how to pronounce that, vowel sequence followed by a comment from the author saying, these are 49 letters, their numerical value is 9999. It's not really sure if it's 9999 because the this part in the papyrus is broken. The same name is written in the resurrection of the dung beetle, 49 letters. Search where it does say, and then really like classic, like in a movie, then the papyrus is broken. So we don't know where to search because we don't know what we are looking for, what kind of words we are looking for. But this is at the top of the manuscript. So basically, the name is not a formula as suggested in the Betts edition. It's actually the name, and this one consists of 49 vowels, and this is added above, including the side note saying "see above." And I find this really interesting because this is what we talked about at the beginning. This that ritual instructions are not, or I think they very often are not like copies, that just get copied one on one, but they are vivid, living testimony of practitioners. Where they make additions or where they realize, oh, this one doesn't work so well, so I have to make changes here or something like that. And I wonder because of the previous sentence we talked about, because the text says write the name on your papyrus, and usually we would think this is the name just given the sentence, the previous sentence, with the heart and the snake. But for some reason the author decided to make a note and then add this name based on vowels. And you said earlier you think that these the additional writing on top of the normal instruction on at the top of the page, that was written by a second hand. And I got a high resolution image from the British Library, and I'm not sure if this is actually a second hand because it is written in a much smaller script, but you see at some points that the thickness of some letters is the same as in the main text. So I wonder if it's basically the same sort of stylus. Do you say stylus? Yeah.
Mhm.
So writing tool to write, and that the script, the scribe tried to, when you turn the stylus a bit so that you get a thinner line. So
Yeah, I mean, it looks it's hard. It's so paleography is not my strong suit, but the hand of the main text is not that great in general. It's not a super well trained hand. I think, at least not compared to other papyri. Um, but it looks really rushed. It looks rushed, and it looks it's much more cursive at least. Um, so I don't know if it's the same hand or another hand, but it definitely is the case. It's two things that strike me as odd. One is that it's odd that the writer of the main text didn't include it at the where you think they would have included it.
yes,
They put it at the top where typically that would have been blank space, basically to protect the papyrus when it's rolled up. You leave a big gap in the top and the bottom, basically
yeah,
to protect the main text. It's a conspicuous place to put a very important part of the ritual. In some sense, one of the most important parts of the ritual, because you have to have that headband to get everything working, and to put it at the top of the papyrus would endanger that precisely that part, and that's why it's damaged. In fact, um, that's I think that's what accounts for part of the damage up there. But also, it's just such a cramped, rushed hand. It's
yes,
put up there almost as an afterthought,
yes,
which is
yes.
just odd.
Well, actually, it's so in the demotic magic papyri I work with, and I'm translating. This is a common practice.
Hmm.
You find that very often on top, but also below the actual instruction, and then it seems at first sight if it's a different hand. But if you really compare, like where the pressure points and the style of how do I say it in English? You know, where you start a sign and where you start a stroke, and like with our handwriting, you realize no, it's likely the same scribe, just later or another day. Or what we have to consider is papyrus is not perfectly smooth.
Hmm.
And I don't know if we're here on the verso or on the recto. And if it would be the verso, it would be explained really easily, because you I mean, it's very tiny letters, and you have this stylus, but you have the papyrus fibers. And you're a calligrapher, so you probably have written on
I
papyrus.
have, yeah. Actually, I'm going
And
to copy out the entire Stele here in a couple days.
oh, awesome.
Yeah, I'm going to copy the whole thing out on a sheet of. I
That's
actually have the
beautiful.
papyrus prepared over here.
Okay, but then you know how difficult it can
Mm.
be if you have a stylus with a thinner, pointy top you write with, and then you come along a vertical fiber or vertical fibers. Your pen just gets stuck there,
Right.
and that might explain the thicker a and eta, also alpha and eta, and the letters you see there. So in the Egyptian magical papyri, it's quite common to make these additions. It's not unusual, and to make notes at the edge referring to look at above or look below. So um, I think, I hope we got time to get to this later, but I think the whole context of this ritual is basically rooted deeply in Egyptian tradition, and tradition that's from the New Kingdom, and from up until the intermediate, die dritte Zwischenzeit, the third intermediate period. So over 1,000 years before the author. So I think it has a very deeply rooted Egyptian tradition. And maybe we do actually, we maybe we are dealing actually with an Egyptian scribe. And I'm not sure actually. I don't think that's too familiar or to occurs too often in the Greek magical papyri. If I think of 4 or 7, but it is common in the Egyptian papyri.
Mhm.
So just to say that. Um,
And so the six names that it refers to, and this is a thing that was perplexing to me, is that the six names are those names at the top of at the top of the papyrus.
oh, no, 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 we're not there yet.
Oh, not there
I'm
yet.
going through
So
my notes so that I don't forget something, because um so the name here in the instructions, there's this one name has to be written on new papyrus. That's
mhm,
important, new papyrus.
right, right, the name, yeah, right, right.
And has to be tightened to your forehead. And I
Hmm.
wonder if there's a connection and to the head tefillah, from Jewish tradition, which is placed between the eyes, as far as I know, at the boundary of the forehead and the hair, right?
Right, yeah.
Um,
Yeah, but I think
and
that there are lots of headgear. I think in not unique to Judaism, but also you see. I think there are other kinds of ritual headgear that we see like this in the Greek magical papyri too. I think.
I was wondering about that, and I think this, especially tying to the head, it does occur a few times, but it's not really common. It's more
Mm.
common to just tie it around, or like to place it on someone, to wear it as, like, around your neck, or to tie it around the arm. But it seems that here we have the amulet to protect the practitioner during the ritual. And then the next sentence says, and that's where we get to the six names.
Right. And I
Read.
guess it isn't shocking. I mean, there's something about heads here, right?
Yeah.
I mean, again, I mean, just to put it on the nose, make another reference to a head. We're dealing with a very heady ritual, and tying something to your head seems unsurprising, I suppose.
Well, I think the idea here is that basically in the conception in the ancient magical papyri is that demons always, no, often are perceived as being in the head of the patient.
Mm,
So, when you have exorcism rituals in the PGM, you often have that the practitioner talks to the head, or if you go in the Egyptian text, like into the head of the patient. So the demons are imagined to be or thought to be in the head. So this might be a reason why here is it's especially mentioned that you have to tie it to your head
Mm.
to protect demons from attacking your head. So we then go we then read in the direction of north the six names, saying, here it gets a bit tricky again. Which six names does the author refer to? Betts doesn't say anything to that, but Preisendanz, and here again, if you can get hands on a Preisendanz copy, and it's available online, do it. Even if you don't speak German, there's really great translation tools online out there. Preisenland has much more comments. And he suggests in a note that the six names probably correspond to the six types of spirits in the following lines, 166 to 168. And there it says, subject to me all demons. So all demons. So that every heavenly demon and aerial and earthly and sub-earthly and terrestrial and aquatic and every you can say that visitation or enchantment, the Greek term is epipompe, and scourge of God may be obedient to me. So the six types of spirits here are the heavenly, the aerial, the earthly, the sub-earthly, the terrestrial, and the aquatic. And the idea is that because the number matches, that these are the names you have to speak to the north. And what's interesting then that what's showing now is the final sentence. And it says, and obedient to you will be all spirits. The good sign is. What's missing actually is the amulet for the patient, because basically every exorcism and so many other practices in the PGM do require, especially exorcisms, do require an amulet for the patient during the ritual, and often enough to be worn after or following them the ritual. So I wonder if these names maybe had to be written down too, but I don't know. The other weird thing is this final sentence, the good sign is. And here it's good to take a look at the original text, because it's not actually sign, it's zodion. It doesn't say character or sigil, but zodion. Because it's interesting, because we would have a potential connection to the zodiac then.
Mhm.
Potential, but not necessary, but potential connection here. And that's it for the Stele of Yeo. Um,
Yeah,
and,
I guess two questions I would have leading out of for the Stele is that it's also conspicuous to me that there are six sets of nomina barbara, and those seem to be names too. I
six set.
think there's six sets, right? I'm looking at them, one, two, three,
Oh,
four,
okay.
five, six.
Okay. I was at the top. The edition we just talked about, and I
Right.
thought, yes,
Like those seem to be names of the entity that the exorcist is invoking, and it could be the case that when he says and read the six names while facing north, I think you're right. It could be the names of the diamonds you're trying to bind, but it's interesting also that we have six sets of nomina barbara.
that's awesome. I missed that. I didn't see that. That's a really great idea.
So
I mean,
this is something I noticed. I don't know that. Yeah, I was. People often ask me what is the actual name? What is the name? The name, and that's you answered that earlier. But then it says say the six names, and you're like, what is the six names? And
yeah.
it's an interesting toss up between the six sets of nomina barbara or the the six daimones that get mentioned there at that last binding ritual.
Well, it explicitly says names or not. This is a really great approach, because it would also make it would make more sense. The whole text would be more complete in and to itself. We wouldn't have to extrapolate something or so. It would usually things refer to something, or at least in the Egyptian tongue, I think in the Greek too, refer to something that has been mentioned,
Hmm.
except it's explicitly said these are the names that will follow. So something like that, that you get the indication. This
Right.
what's coming now refers to something that is later, or like the PGM2 we probably talk about later, where the figure that has to be drawn is at the end of the text. But usually it's okay. But this is awesome. You have to think about that.
Yeah, and I guess the last thing I'll mention is that the name of the when it the name of the Agathon Zodion, the image there, and folks can see. I'll put the image on the screen. One of the things that strikes me as interesting or conspicuous about the sign there, the Zodion, is just how simple it is
Yeah.
compared to the other magical signs that populate the Greek magical papyri, some of which are incredibly complicated. This one is just like it makes me wonder if that and this is to your point about the very deep Egyptian heritage of this, is if this sign isn't actually like a demotic sign or a
No,
hieratic sign or
no,
no.
no.
um yeah,
Actually, what?
it's conspicuously simple
Yeah,
compared to how profound and I don't know, like titanic the ritual is. You would
yeah,
think that there would be a similarly corresponding dramatic magical sign, and yet what we basically get is two vertical dots and what looks a bit like a seven, at least the way that Americans draw sevens.
yeah.
So it's just that's always struck me as conspicuous, and I wonder if you have any thoughts on that. Of course, we can't get in the minds of the writer, but it's always struck me as anticlimactic.
Actually, the first time I read the manuscript and I saw this, because this is the last word of the Stele, and then within the same line, the next ritual start. The
Yeah,
next
it's
ritual
for
instructions
detecting a
now.
thief. And that's
And
also weird too, right? Is this
yeah,
this really powerful ritual is just buried between two
yes,
two techniques for detecting
and
thieves.
and a thief who stole a cheese roll.
Right.
We should mention that.
Right.
Um, so the first time I saw the manuscript, I just thought this is a separation mark, because you do have in the Egyptian and in the Greek magical papyri, you do have these um, little symbols that show that here's the end of a ritual and that's the beginning of the next, especially if this ending and the beginning of a new ritual is within the same line. um, and then I realized, well, no, actually, it seems that this is the sign, and the zodion might make some sense here, because the signs that are termed as zodion or zodia in the Greek magic papyri can be more simple than I say the average magic sign, the average character in the Greek magical papyri. But so basically, it's unique. Yeah, as you say, I mean there are other um, not that complex magic signs, but usually, especially with the two dots, signs with dots are rather rare. And
Mm.
as you say, so I wonder if this is actually the sign, or if this is a separation mark and the actual sign was omitted. It's But then on the other hand, if you take a look at the ritual itself and how clear it is, how perfectly structured, actually, or clearly structured, I wonder if it's just a simple sign, if it's just a sign that is that simple.
And also, I think that to your point earlier, that we have the instruction for what the exorcist is supposed to wear, and you mentioned conspicuously missing is what the
Yeah.
exorcised is supposed to have on them, and
Yes.
maybe the this this agathon zodion is meant for the the person being exorcised.
That's one idea. Another idea is, I mean, the entire ritual is called the stele,
Hmm.
and a stele is usually something, or is something, that is inscribed. And I wonder if this might be, and just might be referred to that the invocation as such has to be written down and maybe placed on the patient, on the one who is supposed to be exercised.
Hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just that the title is interesting. It's not
Yeah.
just
Uh, uh,
ritual or a spell to exercise demons. is especially a stele.
Yeah, I mentioned this in the episode I did that this is sort of this is a motif we get in a couple of other places in sort of Hellenic esoterica, where we have things in the Discourse of the Eighth and the Ninth in the Nag Hammadi library. It also says it's to be written down on a stele of turquoise and inscribed in hieroglyphic letters, and famously the Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus. So um, there is some precedent for the idea of something being written down or carved into stone the way a stele might be.
Yes.
Um, yeah, and also could be a metaphor for something enduring or powerful. Often steles are, basically objects by which people bragged about, the Steptia Merneptah or whatever, where you just brag about subjugating people. And so the idea of bragging about subjugation, it would be unsurprising that if an exorcist wanted to evoke the image of having subjugated all these daimons, which is exactly what happens in the text, that a
Yeah.
stele would be an appropriate medium for that.
That's right. So basically, I wanted to come back to your question you asked earlier. That is it an internally disparate text, and
Mhm.
do we deal with originally several texts that were stitched together? And I thought that in terms of formal aspects and structure, I would say no, because the structure is really neat. We have a title, we have a hymn, we have the classical identifications, you are, I am, you have the demand, you have a final identification, a name, and you have ritual directions, and basically all in the correct order. And then we have some notes that were later added and referenced on the side of the page. And we have Egyptian and clearly Jewish elements and names, and a focus on creation and destruction on one hand, and a complex application of individual but connected, interrelated symbols and symbolism from myths and religions. So I wonder if we are actually dealing here with several texts. If we are dealing with several texts that were stitched together, or rather with a well-educated author or composer of a ritual, for which they made use of elements from Egyptian and Jewish cultures, and wove them together based on their individual needs. So likely too complex to be fully understood by us 1600 years or more later. But I wonder if if it's you have this always or often in scholarship that we say, well, this text is stitched together, or they and the composer or the author or the scribe didn't really understand what they were doing. They were taking things from templates they had here or they had there. And on the other hand, I wonder, well, why don't we take in consideration that we are dealing with really well educated people,
Mhm.
who are very familiar with, like for me, because I mean, you've seen I've been very much focusing on Egyptian context, and likely biased by Egyptian context, because that's what I work with, and that's what I'm used to see. Doesn't mean that it's correct, but what the idea with the composers of these rituals is they had access to, like, content of the pyramid text, of the later coffin text, of the Amduat, of so many literature concerning the afterlife, Egyptian literature concerning the afterlife. We're just familiar with parts of that, but these people likely had much better access to an understanding of this literature. And it's not that things were stitched together, but that content was specifically used and chosen for individual purposes.
Mhm.
So
No,
yeah.
that totally makes sense to me, and that's why again I have my unlearned intuition, and then that's why I love to ask experts like you to to get your professional opinion um, on that question. And yeah, it is interesting that the interspersal the intermixing of the of what you're pointing to are very heavily a very ancient Egyptian influences, but also the Jewish influences, both in terms of the reference to Moses and Israel, but also some of the Hebrew names of the
Of
Israelite
name.
God actually in the
Yeah.
Nomina Barbara, and also that section which I wonder about the guess I had there. There's the series of Nomina Barbara that reads to me like transliterated Hebrew into Greek. The Where it reads Basum Isak Sabaoth Yao, like that reads to me like Bashem, like in Hebrew Bashem Itzach Sabaoth Yao, in the name of Isaac. That might actually just be transliterated Hebrew there.
Okay. Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
I don't know, but again, it's so hard to tease that out. But it's interesting how much we have Abraxas and other things in there. But it's interesting. It's conspicuous to me how many times uh, Jewish theonyms appear in the Nomina Barbara.
Yes. That's absolutely correct. And the question is, how do you bring together that the Greek and the Egyptian text always calls, or not always, but always calls them names and refers to them as the names of higher beings. And then on the other hand, if you know um now you see names can be retranslated or explained by Jewish by sorry by Hebrew or like we do in Egyptology, like explaining them based on Egyptian words and meaning. How can you make sense of this when the authors of the PGM called them names?
Mm-hmm.
So were they aware that they would make basically sense in a different language? Was that on purpose, or was it like that at that point of time, or when the way the names were used, that they were understood as names?
Mm-hmm.
So not as sentences, and usually it's how you say Aussagesätze. It's explanatory sentences,
Right.
you just said. So were people using these names and referring to these sentences as names, aware of this meaning, and was it important, or where? And that's the point where we would ask, what's the origin? So how did this use of names start, and is it a special cultural context, or was it across cultures used? And lots of research has to be done there.
Yeah, it's just fascinating. I mean, one of the things, and this is another aspect of your work that I find just terribly fascinating and very important, is is one of the things I would love to see is one of the things you're doing is really documenting all of the magical signs and really giving us basically a database of those. One of the things I would also love to see is a database of the Nomina
Yes.
Barbara and see what patterns exist within the Nomina Barbara, because for instance we know the big long palindromes that the PGM loves to use, but also beginning to see uh, are there statistical patterns in how these get used? Because if we see a statistically observed uh, usage of several names in a row, then that seems to be very much supporting the idea that this is understood as one long string, i.e., a name, as opposed to individual words that carry their own semantic meaning, distinct from being a name. So that's another thing that would be a really interesting. It'd be the great thing to team up with some data analyst people and build up an index of them and begin to
you know
do the
i'm
actual database, the kind of statistical work to begin to see if those kinds of patterns exist.
I'm sitting here, like in Germany we say, I'm smiling like a honey cake horse and Honigkuchenpferd, because this is, you're tapping into or addressing, I don't know how I say it in English. That's my life's vision. Actually, I do love statistical
Mhm.
analysis. I did my master thesis in on a statistical analysis topic, and I what I want, and I've been trying to find people to get together with the competences. I want an online database.
Mhm.
I want an online database, like for the magic science, yes, but also like for these names, and exactly how you say that, you can find patterns, you can look up individual names, and then as a result you can see where they all occur, but you get like visualize data, you can see patterns. Where do
Hmm.
they occur in groups of 2 or 3 or 5 or even more, and what position, and what's their context? What is a specific, as you call them, nomina barbara, called in the original text? Is it
Hmm.
referred to as a name, or is it referred to as something else? Does it have an explicit purpose? Like some names are addressed as this is the name of a higher power, or this is the name that provides you with courage or something else, so in that can protect you. So sometimes you get the function of a name, or how it is used. And this is my dream. And I think technologically it should be so easy, because it's basically a simple web database
Hmm.
where you can, it's the user interface has to be easy, and you have to structure that. I did that for the magic science, actually. So if anyone is listening who can develop a web database, please send me an email. Because
There you go. Yeah, I mean, listen, graduate students out there, there is some graduate student out there who needs a project. This is a project for
yeah.
you.
And just
Um,
imagine how
and
useful
oh,
this
it'd
would
be
this
terribly
having this
useful,
infrastructure and this online access for everyone.
right?
It's not. I don't want it at a university, because you still have sometimes, or you still have web databases, or some parts of it restricted to academics. I want it in the open, so and everyone can mirror it, or whatever, and can take the data and print it or save it and use it. And imagine what a powerful tool that will be. And
Right.
then you could add the database of magic science. And another thing, that was an inspiration by a follower under the name Solomonic Magic, that counting gods,
Hmm.
taking a look at what gods are actually invoked or mentioned, and then looking statistically, is there Osiris mentioned um specifically often in specific context, or in specific rituals, or as name to be written down, or as deity to be addressed at looking east, or rather west, or something like this, that you have all the names of higher powers, not just the onomata barbara, the nomina barbara, but of all the Egyptian gods and Greeks gods, and what you say, like Abrasax, Adonai, Sabaoth, imagine you have all of them, and then you can just type in Osiris, and and you can get the information. Okay, doesn't occur in divination, but occurs in this and this and this, in protection, or in here, and
Hmm.
you can actually see it, and you have the data, and you don't have to guess anymore, or you know you just got the data. So sorry,
Right.
sorry.
And I
Getting
think
off.
the reason why this doesn't exist, because it's obviously this is the kind of thing that should exist, because we have a static data set. We'll discover more Greek magical papyri at some point, but this is a relatively static data set. And I think the reason why it doesn't exist is the same reason why you look at early editions of the Greek magical papyri and they just dot out the nomina barbara. There's a prejudice, a long-standing prejudice on a part
Yes,
of scholars that's just, oh, this is just nonsense, and who cares? This is just magical nonsense by quasi-literate people who were just stumbling around in the dark with superstition. And it just shows that kind of long-standing prejudice um, derails the ability of people like you and other academics and who want to really get into the weeds of how these texts operated in their historical and cultural context. It's a very misguided assumption that I think has greatly diminished the ability of scholarship to really get a handle on these texts, because it just assumes, oh, this is just gibberish, and why should we be paying attention to ancient superstitious gibberish, which is just such a it again the academia always surprises me with how ironically anti-intellectual it can be.
yes, uh, absolutely right. Yes. Well, I think with the database, another problem is funding.
Yeah.
Because I was working with the you probably heard of the Campbell Bonner's Magical Gems database, and
Hmm.
Arpad Nach, who is the director. And when they started, I did analysis of the magic signs, and provided them the information on which gems are magic signs. And I developed the interface, the graphic user interface for a database for magic science, so that people embedded in this Magical Gems database. And the problem was simply to get the funding to pay the people who could develop this kind of database.
Yep.
And that's why that problem, that project never saw life, because just of the lack of money.
Yeah,
Um,
well, that's why I'm on YouTube, doing public education because I can't get funding to even get a job, doing this material in the academy.
yeah.
It again, they have plenty of money for other things, but they don't have terribly much money for people doing the work that we think is important. And which is shocking, and Kirsten, you know this very well, is that the enthusiasm on the part of the public for this material. Your Kickstarter was funded very quickly. Esoterica is doing quite well as a channel. There's a deep desire on the part of the public
Yes.
for the reliable information on these topics, and yet there's a fundamental disjunct between what the university system, both in the states and I think also in Europe, is willing to fund
Yeah.
versus the fact that there's clear interest on the part of the public for this information, which is again deeply ironic considering that the entire task of the university is to provide public education.
Yeah, but I think that this is deeply rooted it's still existing in the heads of many academics. The total, how do you say it? The total resistance to interact with the public.
Yeah,
You know, it's like here's ivory tower, and
yeah,
especially like the I say the people who are the older people in the area. So the more renowned professors. Every time I contact them, and I started to regularly send them just emails and ask questions, like my one of my followers asked this, or here is a video, or look, just to raise their awareness, that there are people out there and really interested in the matter. And usually it's like in the emails, this part where I talk about this, here, science communication, open science, gets totally ignored. So
yeah.
it's like, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and and not to be on the soapbox about this too long, but it's also again for me as a person who's a public educator and a public facing educator on these topics, what's surprising to me is when the academy and academics go, well, why are people turning against intellectuals and experts? Why is there a cultural zeitgeist where all of a sudden no one trusts us anymore? And I'm like, because no one trusts you because you don't interact with them.
Yes.
You look down your nose at people who want an education, and after a generation or more than a generation of basically um, looking down your nose at the public who you're supposed to be serving, are you terribly surprised they don't trust you anymore? Are you terribly surprised there's a cultural moment where there's a great many people who just don't trust experts anymore? You at
Yeah.
some level, the institutions are responsible for for this attitude on the part of the public, and that
Yeah.
attitude on the part of the public is very dangerous. And I really, again, there's a lot of things we could really, I think, talk about in this thing, and we're getting a little bit off topic, but it's a very important tangent. But this is important information,
Yes.
and the more that we can, again, this is the kind of thing, Kirsten, that I would love to help you. If someone's out there who can do the database stuff, and we could, figure it
Oh,
out.
this
This is
is
another thing we could
so
crowdfund. We could People would throw $5, $10 at this, and people would want to have the information, and I bet we could crowdfund it
we have to
faster
talk
than we could get funding from whatever institutions we
we
happen to work at.
we have to talk about this in half a year, because this is actually my life's vision. And I thought, after the crowdfunding was successful, I thought, this is so awesome. So if I manage to deliver really great products, so like, that the two books are really great and people are happy, my next crowdfunding would be about crowdfunding the database for the magic signs and the names.
Yeah.
So that's my secret project.
Well, there
But
we go. And again, yeah, let's circle back in
yes,
time. And you certainly have my support both in the first project and in coming projects, because again, I want to one, put my money where my mouth is, but also and so far as Esoterica is a platform by which it's popular, I want to be able to push people in the direction of reliable information about these topics, and
awesome.
uh,
So
and
great.
and the work like yours is the kind exactly the kind of work that I want to amplify as much as I can.
My God,
So
thank you.
so
This is
that's
so such an honor. Thank you for respecting and valuing my work so much.
yeah.
Thank you.
This is again, if we're not going to get the respect that we deserve from the institutions that we work for, then at least we can get that kind of admiration and respect from our colleagues actually doing the work of forward-facing public education. Where if the universities aren't going to back us, then we back each other, and um,
Sounds
I think
great.
that that's at least the attitude that I want to have. Not that I'm turning my back on the institutions, but I'm shining a mirror on a weakness of the institutions, and I think they
Yes.
need to fix it. But until they fix it, well, we got to do the damn work. Someone's going to do it, so it's going to be us. And I'm happy to be part of a network of people backing each other in the furtherance of public education and public access to reliable information and data on these topics.
Awesome. So I mean, you really have a huge audience. So maybe there's really someone who can do some web programming, or who knows someone who can. And wouldn't that be awesome if
Yeah,
you know if this talk would lead to like more people thinking about this, and not just web database programming, but what how to make this great and useful to everyone.
yeah. That's
Awesome.
that's that's the that's that's the name of the game. I mean, the channel's called Esoterica, but it turns out that it's ironically named because most of what I do is make things available. I don't esotericize; I make esoterica accessible, and it's just an amazing. Again, the melding of education and technology and esoterica into
Yes.
again, this is what things are about. Let's turn to the
Yes.
Akephalos, right?
So
Um,
why invoking? Oh, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you.
No, 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 no. Let's turn because I think we've done you've done an amazing job of walking us through the ancient ritual, which and I'm sure that listeners will really have really appreciated. I really appreciate it because it really clears up so much conceptions and misconceptions that I had, and I think it will be really useful. But I think that the real elephant in the room, the headless being in the room, is the Akephalos.
Yeah.
This being is so mysterious and so interesting and clearly so powerful. And the question I want to open up, right, is who is this? What is this being? What can you tell us about this being? And in the show notes, I say, take as much time as you like, and I really do mean that. I really do mean that. So let's, because this is, I think, an interesting question for lots of people, and including myself. And so I really would really looking forward to uh, to hearing what you have, and not expecting a full explanation because it's still quite mysterious, but
Right.
you have a
And
lot of great information to share with us, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you. So, Kirsten, please.
I thought I bring you some examples.
Hmm.
Starting with the our corpus we're talking about, the Greek Magical Papyri, and then taking a bit of a look at some archaeological evidence. Then I've got some quotes from the Hermetic corpus. But what is really interesting, and I owe this to you, because I wouldn't have oh, how do you say, dived, dove.
Dived. I'm not sure.
If you dive into something and then the
Hmm.
path. So I wouldn't have looked into the Akephalos in that depth without your invitation to talk about it. And at the beginning, I thought, well, you have two monographs from the early 21st century. And then you got a couple of, or like 10, 15 papers, but not really any more recent publication. And the publications focus on this ritual we talked about, and identifying Akephalos with Osiris. And the more I read about it, and the more information I found about ancient Egyptian roots and ancient Egyptian headless deities, like, not necessarily in legion, but I brought a photograph I want to show you later, so that people can see this is not a phenomenon from the Greek Magical Papyri, but there is an Egyptian tradition going back at least to Tutankhamun, and Various Ramses. Um, so we're in the New Kingdom, and this is so exciting. So Okay, I'm getting lost here. I have to focus. I brought some examples, and let's start with the example that's basically most often referred to following our Stele, and that's PGM2. In PGM2, we have basically two revelations, divination rituals. And the beginning is destroyed, but we now know that PGM6 belongs before PGM2. But even there, the beginning is not preserved. So basically, we have two revelation, two divination rituals. In both of them, Apollon is the main deity that is invoked, is the central deity, being invoked to give answer to the questions of the practitioner and to provide a revelation. But in opposite to the ritual we just talked about, in PGM2, in both of the rituals, um, the Akephalos, which is drawn actually, is serves a side function. So he's in the first ritual, he's to be written down on a little piece of papyrus and placed below the head of the practitioner. So basically, that's very Egyptian tradition, dream revelation. So you conduct a ritual, you invoke your deity, and then you lay down and sleep, and you put a sheet of papyrus under your head. So as we have here the Akephalos clearly as a messenger, and the other way the Akephalos is how do you say this without being unpolite, used or utilized here is as a threat. If Apollon doesn't occur, you draw the figure, and now imagine that you draw the figure of the Akephalos on a sheet of papyrus, and you either throw it in a hypocaustum, which is the heating system of a bath. The best translation is not really precise here. They provide a note, but if you don't read notes, you just read fire. But it's not to be written to be thrown in the fire in the first instance or description, but in the system. So it's very hot. It's very hot there. It's a lot of smoke, but it's not direct into the fire. But in the second ritual, as to force Apollon to occur, you actually have to um, write it down on a piece of cloth from someone who died violently. Make how do you say it? What do you put in a lamp to and you put in a lamp and to lighten it so that the lamps burn? Not a
Oil
wick,
or a wick?
a wick.
Mhm.
So and then you burn it. And now imagine that. Can you do you have you heard of any ritual with Osiris or Ra or Isis or Amun, where their image has to be burned? So that's totally unimaginable. But here, that's how the Akephalos is applied. And I think we can clearly see here two very different conceptions. Could you say conception? Yeah, thoughts of the Akephalos. So what I think is if we will see more examples, but what is relevant to see is that the Akephalos, there's basically not the Akephalos in the Greek magical papyri, but there's obviously different perceptions of who he is and how he can be embedded or implemented in a ritual. And let's take a look at the drawing that is provided in PGM2 at the end of PGM2, which is the Akephalos. And this is really interesting because if you take a closer look, you see that there are five, I say, lines with little things on top of them coming out of where usually the head is. And in this ritual, he is referred to as the Akephalos, but he isn't totally headless. And these five things are interpreted very differently as eyes, as snakes, as eyes of snakes, and as blood fountains coming out. Um, so there's I think actually it looks like snakes heads or eyes, and it would relate to, or it would draw a thin line kind of thing, relation to our ritual. The relation of Akephalos to Atum and the snake or snakes. and we see a bit more of snakes later. But relevant here in with this example is here he's not Akephalos is not the main deity. He's not the one that is invoked to provide the divination.
Kirsten, could
Mm,
it possibly be that those are also like Neter hieroglyphs?
hieroglyphs
Yeah, could it be the hieroglyph for Neter, like God?
for nature. Oh, mm, that will be the other direction.
I mean, I mean, just to just to when my
You mean
mind
the
jumps
standard?
to,
It's
in, there's no hieroglyphic imagery anywhere else, right? Most of it's just vowels and sabaot and stuff like that. But again, we're dealing with a kind of weird God, but I mean, they could be conceived as the Neter
not
hieroglyph.
really, because
Mm,
the hieroglyph. So if you're not in demotic, but in the hieroglyph, the nature hieroglyph is actually, I think you say, a standard with a falcon, and that's really relevant. You don't only have the standard thing, but you have the falcon on top of it, and that doesn't. I don't think it doesn't. Let's say like it doesn't resemble hieroglyphs. It doesn't even resemble the demotic sign for nature. So if you really scroll in, if you get a high resolution image, it does look like eyes. I would say, but basically the idea is great, and it's five. You do have other depictions of the Akephalos with just lines coming out. That's where the interpretation of the blood fountains or blood lines is coming from. You have other depictions where you have lines. Just, we're going to see one. Um, and that can be six or eight. And I wondered if this could be like to the to a number of deities from cosmogony or from creation or from Egyptian mythology or something, but that is highly speculative. What I think is relevant is just to notice he's not entirely headless there. I mean, he is referred to as the Akephalos, but he's not entirely headless there. Shall we go on?
sure, sure.
Okay, okay,
And
awesome.
just also, just to be clear, I wasn't saying nature. I was the hieroglyph NTR for
Yeah, yeah,
like
I know.
the
Yeah,
divinity.
I know.
Okay, yeah,
That's nature. It's
yeah,
pronounced nature because it's
nature.
not a T, it's a ch.
Right, right,
So not nature. So I said
right.
nature. No,
Oh no, I was
nature.
just
I think
making sure. And also, I'm looking at the demotic glyph for it. You're right. There's actually two. There's two strokes there.
the demotic hieroglyph actually goes the other way around. So it
Right.
starts to the right, and then because hieroglyphs basically look to the direction of the beginning of the line.
Hmm.
So the demotic hieroglyph would be the other way around. But yeah, you could say, well, they're reading from right to left, and
Right.
not demotic, but hieroglyphs can be read from all kind of directions. So I think the idea is great. I keep that in mind when I keep digging into older material. The other reference we find in the publications in the scholarly publications, but also in the public discourse about the Headless One is PGM 36, and that's this one here. You have the image, you can show the image. And the interesting thing here is the figure is not an Akephalos, and the text doesn't mention an Akephalos. The text just says write down the figure. And what we have here is I have to get rid of this, is a Stethocephalos. It's a breast head. And the first or the most ancient source we have for the breast head is actually Herodotus, who wrote about a people with breast heads. And here you can see the figure has eyes, and it it does have a head, but the head is where the breast is in the breath. So there is literature there about the Stethocephalos. What I would say a reference here to the Akephalos, that's modern, and I'm pretty sure that's not the idea, or that's not. Let's say it differently. As an archaeologist or as a scientist, I cannot provide strong arguments to substantiate the hypothesis that this is Akephalos. Ta-da. So, what is an Akephalos? And I thought this is so amazing. Take a look. I mean, most people have heard of dendra, and we know the round zodiac. of Denver. But there's also an astronomical ceiling in the outer hypostyle hall of the Hathor temple. It's Roman and it's rectangular. And here I got, with the kind permission from the photographer, I got this image for us. And these are the Paranatelanta, and that of the deacons that are depicted here. But we also see to the left Aquarius. And here we have a clear depiction of a headless, of a headless deity. We don't know exactly how this Akephalos was perceived, but he here depicts I always get this wrong, Paranatelanta. So a star, or a star sign rising with a zodiacal sign in accompanying a zodiacal sign. And this is Capricorn. I found this really interesting, and a beautiful and very clear depiction. And we have in scholarly literature, when we move on to the astronomical ceiling, with round zodiac from Dendra, one scholarship thinks there are several depictions of the Akephalos as well. And I've close up here, and this sorry, I'm somehow so fascinated what people are willing to interpret. On this image, we can see Aquarius again. Oh wait, we have the Aquarius to the left. So basically, we are in Capricorn, and you see this headless animal to the right, and this is interpreted as a form of the Akephalos. But headless animals are kind of, they are not a rare thing in ancient Egypt. So to say we have headless snakes, and we have a bunch of headless animals. So identifying this with the Akephalos is a bit critical. And another interpretation of the Akephalos is here to the left, the deacon clearly having a sun disk as a head. There's a whole lot of literature about sun disk as a head, and this is not an Akephalos. And but this here is also on the round Denver zodiac, is interpreted as an Akephalos with snakes on top of his head. But if you take a look at the iconography to the right, it's ram's horns. You got this a lot of times on the same zodiac. So everyone who wants to can just go on Wikipedia and take a look at the zodiac, and there's a lot of ram's horns, and that's the iconography of them. So these are not two snakes. And the question is if this is actually an Akephalos. But it is described in the in Gundel's book about the Dekane and Dekan Sternbilder, deacons and deacon
Images.
star signs, yes, um, referred to as the Akephalos. And the 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 person to the left, the depiction to the left, is ignored. He doesn't talk about this one, and then he goes to the horse child on the lotus flower. But the one in the middle is not. We don't see a head, but this is not really a headless one. That is a destruction, when the entire zodiac was cut into pieces to transport it to the Louvre. And you can see this when you have a good image, but you can also see this in the book about the expedition of Napoleon. There is a drawing of this zodiac, and you can see this figure had a head there. So to avoid confusion, so this is not a headless one. And if the one to his right, this could be a depiction of the headless one in a zodiac context as well. And another one I have to, so I'm sorry, I have to close this. Another really interesting one, and I think that's one that is the most unknown one. That is a depiction of the headless one on the astronomical or zodiacal tablets from Grand. Grand is a town in northeastern, roughly France, and the tablets are dated to the late 2nd century, and they were found within the area of a Gallo-Roman sanctuary in a well. So basically, they were likely either it was a, oh my god, my English, it was an offering, or it was just thrown away because it it was broken. But we do have an archaeological context here, and among what the zodiacal tablet shows is the deacons. It's a foldable tablet where there were actually two of them were found, and they display the Egyptian deacons, and among them is a figure that is identified with a headless one. And the interesting thing is that Aubrey, the author of the tablets, he assumes that the headless one is related with the winter solstice, which occurs at the Tropic of Capricorn. So here again, we have the Akephalos, like in Dendra, on the rectangular zodiac depictions in context of Capricorn. And you can show this, or you probably have the images there. So you do clearly see a figure that has like a little pyramid shaped, triangular shaped thing where the neck is, but there is no head. And he has little wings on his right and his left shoulder, and the things on top of his shoulder, on his right and his left shoulder, I interpret differently, and some interpret them as blood, again, as blood spatter, and others think that might be birds. So I find this really interesting, this deacon context of the Akephalos. And then there is one more I would like to show. What when? Oh wait, sorry, we have to. Uh, I'm sorry, that is really when your brain wants to say 20 things at the same time, and somebody is like, so I'm sorry that I start over. In terms of the headless one in as a deacon in antiquity, basically around the time of our Greek Magical Papyri, this is references in the Hermetic corpus. And I owe this reference. I wasn't aware of this. I owe this reference to Professor Joachim Quack, who's going to publish a book about the deacons, and within this book is a chapter of the Akephalos, and he kindly sent me a preprint, so and allowed me to use this material. So there's two quotes I would like to make, and the first quote is from the Greek version of the Holy Book of Hermes to Asclepios, and it says, "He's headless, but the rest of the body is that of a man, girded around the chest with the skin of a scarab." This is really interesting. I imagine how to do this. In his right hand, he holds a water vessel, but the left hand has falling down to his thigh. And this is a reference to the deacons in Capricorn. And the Latin list of deacons from the Liber Hermetis Trismegisti, the Triginta Sex Decanis, it says he's headless. In his right hand, he holds his own head, but in his left, a sword. And we don't have the time to go deep in here, but I think everyone familiar with the imagery of the Greek Magical Papyri knows images of in PGM 36, for example, of someone holding a hand in his a head in his one hand and a sword in the other. So the Hermetic corpus also knows about an Akephalos in context of deacons or as a deacon. And then what I think is really important, and or not really important, but really interesting, if you are interested in understanding who is the Akephalos, or what are the roots of the Akephalos, and when digging deeper into and looking for if there are any ancient Egyptian depictions or mentionings, there are. And one that is really extraordinarily well preserved is an example from the third intermediate period, that's between the 11th and the 7th century BC. And it's a sarcophagus of and that's awesome, of the overseer of the secrets, chief lector priest of Amun. And his Amduat papyrus, I sent you a photo, so we can use this too. Um, this is so amazing because you see here a number of headless deities. This is all divinities, deities depicted here, and you see many Akephaloi, and you see the context of snake-headed, but also one with where the head is the feather of Maat, with lion-headed, another snake-headed. You have snakes everywhere in between them. You have falcon-headed. So the idea of this headless divinity is actually existing in ancient Egyptian context of the underworld, which where we have a relation to Osiris. Osiris himself is known in much older Egyptian tradition and depicted as a headless mummy, and I find this is so interesting to see this, to have a connection between the headless one and Osiris again, which we have in our stele.
Hmm.
And one source I can recommend everyone who is interested in the Akephalos in Egyptian mythology and religion. There's a rich source is the publication of Piankov and Rambova. It's called Mythological Papyri Texts, simply like that. It's from 1957 and it's available online. And just type in your however you read it online, type in headless, and you get abundance of a lot of sources. And I would like to finalize these examples with a quote, um, and it's let me see, it's some of the content of, and this exists in ancient Egypt, the Book of the Headless One, and oh, so this last quote is from Colleen Manasseh in from her book The Late Egyptian Underworld: Sarcophagi and Related Texts from the Nectar Nebit period. I'm sorry. Um, and now I have to find the quote again here. So she says, mhm, so some of the content of the Book of the Headless One may even be preserved in several late kingdom um, and side period magical texts which exploit the unique properties of the headless Osiris. In one such document in Papyrus Deri Medina 44, the following description appears. And here's the quote. He speaks to Osiris, the Great One, Lord of Hermopolis, noble mummy, flaming one, who is headless. And so we have another reference to the headless one here as Osiris, but also we have the flaming context. You know, we were wondering about what's the eternal, the what is this immortal flame
Hmm.
and fire spitting all over the sky, and I think a lot of things that seem to be mysterious to us in the stele we talked about and the Akephalos, we can find answers to in older Egyptian books concerning the underworld, the afterlife, but also in much older Egyptian cosmogony. And I think this is amazing. You know, this we do actually have a book of an Egyptian book of the Headless One, and my experience is that you often on conferences you have specialists, like you have Egyptologists and you have classicists and you have people from here, and you have people specialized in ancient Jewish magic like Gideon Bohak. But this what we would actually need, I always imagine all these people like standing in a huge circle and then throwing all their knowledge in the center. You know, that's what we would need, this melting pot where's all this in, because then we would finally see much more of the connections, and we would be able to see that the people who wrote these or who composed and wrote these rituals that are preserved in the Greek magic papyri, in the Egyptian magic papyri, but also who created all the artifacts, they don't deserve to be called uh, tricksters, illiterate, or like, people from lower social, how do you say it? From social layers. Do you say
Hmm.
layers?
Hmm.
Yeah, okay. So sorry, that's not because I don't know how to say it, it's just I don't know how to say it in English. um and they don't deserve to be called like that, because I think they were incredibly well, or incredibly familiar with a lot of ancient material, much more ancient material. um, and be it Egyptian, be it from Jewish culture, be it from Greek culture. And it's just that we often don't see it, or we don't see it in scholarly publications, because it's always written by specialists who are specialized in one area, like in Egypt, or in Egypt in a special period, maybe even in
Hmm.
in late antiquity, in Latin, or in Greek, or even in special deity, something like that. But this whole picture, we don't have the picture yet. And I think the Akephalos is an incredibly well example to illustrate this. There is not that much scholarly publications about the Akephalos, but it's basically all around Osiris, because of this one identification with Osiris, and focusing on this area. So everything in common area. So not really older sources. And if you see now that you can not only go back to Dendera, but you can go back to like the time of the New Kingdom, this is amazing.
And just to circle back, the this book of the headless one, is that a complete text, or is that something we exist in fragments? I've never heard of it before, frankly.
I haven't heard of that before. I read this book too, and as far as I understand, it so far we only know about this because of a reference in a papyrus who lists um, ancient books.
Ah, okay. So it's we know
Right?
that it existed as a book. We don't,
Yes,
but we don't have we don't have a text of it.
I I I don't know, because I just read about this too. So I didn't have the time to go deeper, but it's definitely a point where it's worth to go deeper and to see, okay, what are the references? Is there just one papyrus, or do we have more mentions of this? Do we have fragments? And now you know that the thing is, often we have like literally millions of pieces of fragmented papyrus, inscribed papyrus, all over the museums all over the world. And the problem is often that, if you take a look at them, and if you read fragments, or even if you have like a whole sheet, or a larger piece, if you're not familiar with the content, you can't relate it. You just read something and think, yeah, well, and then it gets back in the drawer, because it's perceived as irrelevant. A good example is the Book of the Temple, which is, I think it's Joachim Quack as well, and he's been working for I don't know, decades, um, to see if this book really existed. And he traveled all over the world to papyrus collections and studied fragments, and he managed to compile this book. And I think it's going to be published soon. Um, so see, this is, if you're not aware that something exists, it's you can't really recognize it. So knowing that this book of Akephalos existed means that now talking about it with your audience, there's much more people many more people being aware of this, and being able to look into it. This is the power of the public, actually, because everyone has got 24 hours a day, and as a single person you can't just manage to read all the publications that exist and to look at all the papyri. But if you've got many people looking into it, and more resources become available in open access, and that's another reason why it's so important that they become available in open access, because it's much more people power that can look into this information, can look into data, can look into sources. And I'm looking forward to see what we can find out about this book of the Headless One, the most relevant information is that it did exist. A book of the Akephalos existed in ancient Egypt, and that's amazing.
No, that's really fascinating. I'm sorry for my audio, folks. There's a vacuum cleaner running in the room over from me. I apologize. Does it give the Egyptian name for it, for the Book of the
Oh,
Akephalos?
um, well, yeah, it's a it's in modern pronunciation Pa Yuti Tepef, which means basically Pa is the article, so the, and then Yuti Tepef means it's a negation of his head, so without a head. So basically, it doesn't say the book of the headless one, but it says the of the headless one. But that's typical for Egypt,
Right.
for how you names her. So Pa Yuti Tepef. Tepef is his head.
Yeah. So it's literally Akephalos. That's a perfect
Yes.
translation.
Yes.
Um, that's fascinating. So I mean, maybe this is maybe as a kind of uh, wrap up of the Akephalos, and this is maybe unfair to you, but I'll ask anyway. Could you maybe summarize your thinking, briefly summarize your thinking on what the Akephalos was? And again, not to not to put that definition on you forever, and not to not to anything like that. But if someone were to ask you on the bus, who was the Akephalos? What would be your short summary of who you think the Akephalos was in the ancient Egyptian Greek magical papyri context?
So based on the sources I'm familiar with, so I have had a chance to look into and I've heard of, and focusing on our time here, the Greco-Egyptian Roman period. uh, I think we can say on based on what we've seen, um, that the Akephalos was understood in very different ways, and among them, um, as a higher power, powerful higher power, I identified with Osiris Nefer. So with Osiris in context of Osiris, but also identified with a creator deity. And I think that could likely be Atum. But if it's Atum or another creator deity, but we clearly have the reference in our Stele that he's identified with a creator deity. So the most powerful deity you can imagine in ancient thought. He was also understood as a supportive or as a messenger demon in ritual practice, communicating between the practitioner and the higher power he wants something from. Our What we haven't talked about, and that's really interesting because the Akephalos does have a chapter in the Testament of Solomon, and the Testament of Solomon is all the demons basically. The Akephalos is described in Modila, like the typical dialogue. I Solomon ask him and so forth, and he is an evil demon. And when Solomon asked him, "How do you see, or how do you speak?" he basically answers, "Well, he eats the heads of people, and through or because of he eats or he's eaten so many heads, he can speak with their voices and see with their eyes," something like that. So he is actually in our Greco-Egyptian Rome period perceived as an evil demon as well. He is perceived as a paranatelonta, as so an accompanying star of deacons, and he's perceived or understood as a deacon as well. So the what I think with I mean our 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 Greco-Egyptian Roman magical papyri, um, they reflect this syncretistic concept of you know combining features and powers of deities into new, potentially, oh, that's really thin ice here now, but into new deities, or combining features into new deities, or enriching and changing deities in their features. And basically that's likely what we can see here. There is a more ancient Akephalos people know about, and it could be that it's not really clear because there's not so many myths and not so many texts as we have about Osiris or Isis, or other major ancient Egyptian deities that were at hand at the time of the Greek Magical Papyri. So it's we can imagine that there were different conceptions because people had access to different sources about the Akephalos. Some might have had access to ancient Egyptian, more ancient Egyptian sources. Some to Dendera, where the Akephalos is depicted as a Parnatelata, or even as a deacon. So, you know, people saw different things, people read different things, and had a different perception of who the Akephalos is. And I think this is a wonderful example of how syncretism not work, but what is syncretism, and also about the the cultural plurality of the people involved in ritual practice. Was it the kind of summary you were thinking of, or you want me to say more?
No, I think that's great, and also I think that we have to, and again, to this is to your point, that if we're talking about a deity whose existence can be attested from the New Kingdom, like the 16th century BCE,
Yeah.
all the way to the Testament of Solomon, which is a third, fourth century text. Who knows exactly when it was written? We're talking about an entity that existed for is attested for 1800 years,
At
um,
least, yes.
at least, and unsurprisingly, it's going to change over the course of 1800 years. I mean, we're talking about a deity that has been attested for as almost as long as Jesus of Nazareth has been a deity.
Yes.
And so, and again, I said it was an unfair ask of you because you're basically I'm asking you to summarize how a a deity survived and changed for 1800 years, but um, I think what I want to impress upon people is we're talking about an enormous span of time, along with an enormous span of cultures, right? From the New Kingdom to the world of early Christianity. We should be very unsurprised that this one, we should be unsurprised that this being will change over time. And two, I think we should be unsurprised that there's just a lot we don't know because a lot's been lost. For instance, perhaps this book of the Headless One, maybe we'll find it. But there's just also the case that you really get the sense that we're, even very qualified scholars are still only able to access a very thin layer of the historical memory of what did exist. And that it's amazing. One, we're lucky to have anything at all, of course, but it also you get the sense, or at least I get the sense, I'm not sure if you do, that there's just a uh, that we're seeing the tip of the iceberg compared to both what existed, but also, for instance, the ritual knowledge of the person who composed um, the ritual of the Stele as we have it.
Yes, I think that this is a core point. The When we go back and imagine we're like in the third or fourth century, um, we have to take into consideration the transmission and the access. So the transmission of knowledge that existed, and the transmission on the knowledge the people who composed these rituals had access to, and where this knowledge was stored. And a lot of this knowledge, like the book of the Akephalos, the Egyptian one, this is said in the papyrus that it is belongs to a temple library. So we're not in any kind of private someone, being a practitioner for private people in a private context. We're here in an official Egyptian temple context. I mean, there's not much more. There's not much more official than an official ancient Egyptian temple. So, and now when we go back, or when we think we're in the third or fourth century, there are still pagan temples. They're getting closed bit by bit, and but there are still pagan temples, and the question is how much of the knowledge, we do not know. That the assumption that these were not priests, these were private people practicing their magic. There's more and more hints that they were actually priests, even in the third and fourth century, practicing magic, or what we call magic. So the question is, to what kind of transmission did the individual practitioner and ritual composer had access? And if you have access, if you work at a temple, your access was definitely very different from if you didn't work at a temple. So this is something I think it would be really interesting for scholarship to look at the Greek and the Egyptian magical papyri from this perspective, not from saying, well, they all needed to make money and they did this in private, but to look, okay, how can we, from based on the text and based on the content of the ritual, like if you analyze the stele like we did, you really take a look at each sentence and wonder what it could mean and what context it could have. I think we could find out much more about the people who practice magic, about their intellectual background, about their access to knowledge, and so much more. Sorry, I'm getting lost in my brain again.
No, no, I think you're exactly right, and I think that the person that I imagine as someone who would have been very much adjacent to all this is someone like Zosimos of Panopolis, who was himself trained as an Egyptian priest, but also worked as a
Yeah.
philosopher and alchemist. And I think that one is not exclusive of the other, right? You have different, the Egyptian priesthood is very layered. You have priest and lector priests. You have some people that serve as a priest for some part of the year and not for other parts of the year. And so I think that you could have a person who's educated and has access to a priest, to the temples, the houses of life, but also maybe during a part of the year, they're a ritual expert operating in their local community, doing exorcisms or something. So it could just be the case that this is
Yes.
a much more complicated
Exactly.
world. And
Exactly.
again, like the Egyptian priesthood is not a, we shouldn't transpose ideas of Catholic priests onto ancient Egypt and assume that they're, functionaries for life. Lector priests came and went in ancient Egypt. And also the priesthood changed. Again, we're talking about an 1800-year at least cycle from the New Kingdom on. And
Yes.
so it's very important to contextualize all of this as best as we can. And of course, the priesthood looked very differently under Roman occupation. And of course, with the rising hegemony of Christianity, it looked very different still. So it's an um, incredibly complex story, that only in the complexity, only in the messiness of it do we actually get the history. And again, that's one of my favorite quotes: is that which leaves out the mess isn't history.
Yes. Yes. I think, yeah, I think I would like to see more publications about this, analyzing content, and not only like the hymns we did, but also the actions. Like, we had this specific talking to the head, or an analysis of how many times do we actually have inscribed artifacts that have to be tied. Oh, I could look that up. Um, um, that have to be tied to the forehead, for example. Um, I can look this up because that was my PhD was about textual artifacts. So I know I wrote about it. I will send you this information because I think it's really interesting. If you go into details, if you go mm, to look at the ritual, at the Greek magical and Egyptian magical papyri, from the perspective that every sentence potentially has a meaning, and not from the perspective, yeah, well, they oh wait, I need to figure out the words. They just took some kind of, they heard of something, some older myths or something, and they just incorporate into their ritual. But really, to approach the pride from a perspective that people knew what they were doing, that not everyone, of course, there might have been, or there were probably people who betrayed others, but the core idea that the people who composed this ritual, who practiced these rituals, knew exactly what they were doing. Because if you can do one thing, then you see how much respect and how much belief in these higher powers is reflected in the Greek magical papyri. And I find it pretty hard to imagine that these people with these strong beliefs in this higher power, the existence of so many higher powers, to being able to just implement something into their practice, they don't know actually what it means.
I agree with you, and I think that that's why I much prefer the term ritual expert, really putting an emphasis on the word expert. That we typically imagine we have this misconception of magicians as sort of there's just a bubbling pot and they're throwing random things in, they're because they're just frauds. Um, that's a enlightenment uh, disparaging or stereotype about what magicians were in medieval history, and we sort of broadcast that back into the ancient world. And I think that there's just all kinds of things intellectually dishonest and wrong about that idea. And I,
Yes.
I much prefer, talking about ritual experts, really putting an emphasis on the word expert. And I think when we put the emphasis on the word expert, again, these people are literate. We're talking about 2% of the population or something. It's already a tiny sliver of the population that can write at all, and then you have to add on to all of the expertise that you illuminated for us as we went through for instance, the Stele here. uh, Again, I think that your point is well made, and I think it'll be well received by the folks listening. These are not stupid people who are selling trinkets, at the
Yeah.
corner of the market.
That's so
Um,
true. Yeah.
these are highly trained people with an access to a wealth of information that we don't have access to. And again, there's something just really intellectually dishonest and ironic about a bunch of scholars over the past 100 years or so um, dismissing these texts as intellectually undeserving of respect, when in fact, one, we don't know much about them. There's still a lot lost, but also how arrogant just to dismiss
Yes.
this body of literature out of hand because we don't know stuff. We don't know. And
That's
this the
it,
height of
exactly.
intellectual arrogance and the height of intellectual dishonesty.
That's I oh God, I love to hear you saying this, because this is like when I started researching magic science, and I mean I still do, and there's renowned older scholars who actually claim in their publications that, like, magicians, like, the famous bronze disc from Pergamon, probably inscribed with dozens of magic signs created fabricated so elaborately, and actually claiming this was worn by the practitioner, like it's kind of a, a necklace, I think you say necklace, to impress the clients, and for no other reason, just to impress clients, in a way to make them, pay for your services. And it's like, I hear how, from a scientific perspective, please compile the data and then, formulate a hypothesis and provide arguments. And but you find, especially in, like, there are few scholars that especially keep on writing that magic science and magic in general was focusing much on, like, how can you say, blending, when you sorry, give me a second. I got the dictionary here. Blenden, because this is important. Do you say to blind people, to make them believe something that does not exist, and to trick them by drawing mm, um, enigmatically looking signs and using words they do not understand, referring to the nomina to yeah, nomina barbara, um, and basically stating this is all these magic signs, all these names, all these rituals are just made up to blind and trick people to make money. And you think, guys, we're scientists, please, yeah, leave your bias behind and just focus on science. And you got this in so many publications, this prejudice, you say, this arrogant, I don't understand it, and then it means it didn't mean anything. And this is crazy. This totally drives me crazy. This is yeah, that's not what scholarship should be like. Oh, you see this in the translations as well, and especially in older translations. I just recommend to everyone. There's so many awesome tools where you, even if you don't read German, because many older publications for about ancient magic are actually from German scholars, and but also for Greek, that you can copy and paste Greek and into translations and into online translations, and you so you get an idea. You can check if the check you can check if the translations you read, like by Betts or by others, are really translations of the original text, and how much, or you can see how much bias is in there.
Yeah, and also and again, apologies for the sound in the background, folks, but you can also now look at most of these images online. You can see the
Yes.
actual images of the manuscripts, and I highly encourage anyone, if you're interested in the Greek Magical Papyri or any ancient manuscript, get your eyes on the manuscript, because the critical apparatus of Betts, for instance, is lacking, and even with the best critical apparatus,
Yeah.
um, nothing's going to do you better than getting your eyes on actually getting your eyes on the manuscript, because uh, the material culture is incredibly important, not just for the archaeology, but also for the interpretation of these texts. Because we have to understand that ancient texts are not like modern books. It's not like you open up a modern. You can't expect an ancient papyrus to behave like a modern book. And so when you think of when they bookify these ancient manuscripts, there's always loss. There's almost
Fine.
always loss, and you
Bookify.
absolutely have to get your eyes on these manuscripts, and most of them. And that's why in folks who watch esoteric episodes, um, anytime I'm dealing with an ancient text, insofar as I'm able, just like with the episode on the Akephalos, part of a big part of the episode is just me scrolling down the screen, and I'll be doing it in this episode as well, of the actual manuscript, because I really feel like you need to see it. You have to see it. You have to see the artifact. You have to see the thing, because the material culture really does matter.
Oh, actually, the first time I saw the manuscript of PGM4, which is like the most extensive Greek magical papyrus, and you're gonna get thousands of lines, and you've got this images in your head, and I saw that is actually just the lines are just about 9 to 12 centimeters wide. I mean, this is tiny. This is not really much space. So I was so to see this, and to get this idea about how this manuscript was written, totally different from Egyptian papyrus scrolls, and I found this incredibly interesting. And this is really great news for everyone who wants to look, especially at this at the Akephalos, which we were talking about at Stele, because this week I received an email from the British Library that all their magical papyri, all of the images of the magical papyri, are made public domain. And this is really incredibly well news. But they have really difficulties to provide a download button. So I think it's only 2 or 3 sheets or pages are available, but you can contact the licensing department and ask them for high resolution images for in public domain. And the licensing department just sent me an email and told me, well, they are planning to ask for a small fee for providing the information until they manage to provide a download button. So it can be that you have to pay a couple of euros, but you can get all of their magical papyri, and they got quite a few ones, and images, high resolution images, not only for free but in public domain, which means you can use them on your channels, and that's amazing.
No,
I
it's
thought
really great, and again, it's just should be common practice that these are these are treasures of humanity, and therefore should be accessible to people, especially educators who want to make them public. You know, for instance, my channel or other people's channels, your channel, for instance, where we're just trying to do education, and I don't have. You look at some of the licensing fees where they want 300 euro for a single high resolution image of, the images from Dendera or other places, and it's just
yes.
egregious in my mind that I'm not trying to make a ton of money on these images. I'm not publishing a coffee table book for 300 euro. I'm just trying to, make a YouTube video
To
about the
share
Akephalos to
Yes.
educate the public. And,
Yeah.
it's all of these things. I think that if they're in the public holdings of institutions, they should be accessible to anyone, to anyone who wants to use them and wants to view them, because they're treasures of humanity,
Yes.
and they
Yeah.
should not treasures of the British Museum or whatever.
I totally agree, and I'm really happy to see that every year there's more institutions, more
Mhm.
museums, who actually realize that making their images available for to the public and for educational purpose, or basically in public domain, I think it's basically free advertising for them.
No,
You know?
absolutely. No, you're exactly right. It's a really bad look if the British Museum or the British Library, the Vatican Library, comes after a content creator for doing educational work. You don't want to be that. You don't want to be that person. I don't think, but not to say that won't stop them. But I think it's a bad look in a lot of ways.
So basically, it's the great thing is that more and more museums or decision makers realize that, and it's such a different compared to 10 years ago, because there's so much information now that's available online and makes research so much easier. So 10 years ago, I couldn't have prepared all this in such a short time, or I couldn't have provided the photographs or the quotes. It would have been much more complicated. And now a lot of things you can actually do from home, from your computer.
Mhm.
So I think the development we can see there, this is really amazing, and,
Yeah.
and this is a great development.
No, I totally agree, and I think also, COVID has made things has accelerated that process a little bit.
Yes,
You know,
that,
the disability justice people have been, saying for years, like, "Hey, we can make this stuff a lot more accessible." Like, accessibility is a very important thing for, appreciating people's basic humanity. And of course, the disability justice people were told, "No, that's impossible. No, that's impossible." Then coronavirus hit, and everything was certainly possible. So it's one of the lessons we can learn from disability justice people, that we need to think deeper, broader, uh, and better about accessibility, not just for scholars, but for the public, and in
yes,
general.
yeah,
Accessibility
totally
is one of
agree.
the mainstays of education, and I would say of a functioning democracy, frankly. But um, that is how we do things. Kirsten, I guess we can bring the conversation to a close. I have had just a fantastic time learning with you, learning from you, and I just want to really extend a deep, heartfelt gratitude for both the work you've done today. This has been a really great, very long, and very deep conversation around interesting and important ancient text. And I just want to extend my gratitude to you for you taking the time to do this educational work with me and with the channel, but also and to extend gratitude for your scholarship and you taking information that's been, as we've talked about earlier, not taken seriously and not taken with intellectual rigor, and your scholarship doing exactly that with these ancient magical texts. And I really, again, I want to deeply thank you for your time and for your scholarship.
Oh my God, thank you so much. I'm so indebted to you, because without you, there's a lot of things and insights I gained because of doing this research for our talk. And I feel so indebted to you, because you are so patient. I mean, I know that I can keep talking about things, and you listen so patiently. How do you say it? Patience, patiently is right, right?
Right, right, and it's actually not
Yes.
patience. It's just it's. I think we could just call it interest in English.
Okay, okay.
I'm just interested, and I think a lot of people watching, listening, and watching will be interested too. So you don't have to thank me for my patience. It's a topic I'm deeply interested in, and it's wonderful to have you. Again, to have your expertise. That's a gift. That's not something
Thank
I have to endure.
thank you for giving me the platform to share this, and to share this knowledge, and to share my thoughts. I mean, a lot of it's really my thoughts, and based on my current state of knowledge. And thank you for giving me just the chance to share this. It's so amazing, and I would really enjoy questions from our audience. So when there's anything, oh my God, I shouldn't say that. When there's anything they want to, or you want to ask, and just posted in the comments, I think, or posted on my Twitter channel, and I would be most happy to, as far as I can, to answer them.
Yeah, and that's a great offer on your part. Yeah, folks, if you want to leave comments and questions for Dr. Spitza, please leave those in the comments, and she will get to them as she's able and can. And of course, um, Kristen, could you again just tell us one more time where people can find you? And I'll be definitely making your links accessible there in the comments and the description.
Awesome. That is so great. So basically, I'm most of the time I'm on Twitter answering, posting there and answering questions. I love getting questions on Twitter, and I post videos on YouTube, but not too often because it takes a lot of time to make them. But what I'm planning to do in the next days is to start a Patreon channel, and offering ties that, what one tie that is, because I'm asked so often, is doing, like, on a monthly basis, doing translations like we did now with this, with the Stele, but really looking at the original text and looking how it is translated, and going into there. And another tie I was thinking of, and this again I owe to you, is about the Akephalos, because I came across so many Egyptian material and Egyptian depictions that and thanks to you, I learned that this Akephalos and this daily ritual is so important to Western esotericism and occultism. So everyone who is interested, I will offer talking about my research on the Akephalos and what I find out about the Akephalos. Um, yeah, so I plan to start a Patreon channel, and this would be absolutely awesome if people would be interested to learn more about actually the ancient texts and the Egyptian texts, but also about the original texts, and going through not only the Greek but also the Egyptian magical papyri, and sharing my experience with translations and what they actually say. So yeah, I'm totally excited. So this, so Patreon, and I think it will be Antique Magie there too. This is where you can find me.
Wonderful, wonderful. I mean, again, folks, this is the expertise that I love to have access to, and we're really trying to do something innovative here. I think by the exact mirror opposite of the ivory tower, being totally public faced in our expertise, our respective expertise, and making ourselves accessible to the public. Because I can speak for myself, and I may be able to speak for Kirsten as well. I feel indebted to the public for being able to do this work, and I want to be able to offer my education and my expertise back to the public. And it's my honor to be able to do that. And it's amazing that you all are also, insofar as you're able and willing, to support that process through things like Patreon or watching the channel and donating to keep us basically afloat. So definitely check out uh, Kirsten's Patreon when it goes live, and support her work. This is really really important work that deserves support. And I'll say, Kirsten, I'll be happy to be among your earliest Patreon supporters
Oh my god,
when
awesome!
things go
Oh,
live, because I really feel like,
you.
again, I support several other folks online because I think their work's important. I think your work's important, and you can certainly count me in for at least some tier of support on your Patreon. But any last thoughts or comments, or uh, wrapping up comments you want to put out there?
Huh. Good question. My brain tells me to say a lot of things. Yeah, I think, well, yes, I love my followers and my audience, just as you just say. I'm so thankful, and it's like you are providing me the chance to do what I love to do and what I'm most happy with to do. So thank you for all of your interest. So this is amazing. And well, I think the other thing is that the Greek and the Egyptian magical papyri. And we actually we shouldn't forget, and that we often forget that there are a lot of we don't have Latin papyri, but we do have a huge body of Latin of ancient sources for magic, for Roman magic actually too. So there is much more to this corpus of ancient magical texts than we currently have. We can learn from the translations or from the scholarly publications. And the best thing to do is really to dive in and to look at the sources as best as possible. And your channel provides such an incredible insight. And oh God, we talked about it, like so widespread chronologically and in current terms of content. And this is the best everyone can do to get as much insight as possible from the original, from the ancient sources. And that's basically my final my final words.
No, I think that's great. I think again, and I, I'll say this right. Esoterica is a start to your intellectual journey. It should not be the end. If you're watching an esoterica episode and you think you know something about something, you should definitely think again. Esoterica, the same reason why at the end of every episode, I give you books to read because the YouTube is the beginning of an intellectual journey. It should not be the end of it. And even this conversation, as deep as we got, it's still the beginning of your intellectual journey, and that's the way that I think the way things should go. I don't want to pretend that I'm the end all be all of anything. I am definitely not, and certainly I learned a ton here talking today about the Akephalos ritual, much more than I knew going into making the episode, and I'm really happy. Again, that's the path. That's the tack of scholarship. I make the best episode I can. I talk to an expert, I learn some more. Maybe in 5 years or 3 years down the road, I'll may make another episode, and the scholarship marches on. And I don't want to. Yeah, I'll never feel bad for having not done enough, and I'll always feel motivated to do more. And that's how we balance those out. Is just uh, the the march of scholarship. That's just how things continue to go. But
I I love the image when you said YouTube is the beginning of a journey. So how about we just say two great journeys?
I think so. Yeah, that is where we're off to, folks. Well, again, thank you, Dr. Spitza, for taking the time to come on Esoterica and really get into the deep weeds of the Akephalos. I hope folks have found the conversation interesting, and again, make sure to support your favorite content creators and your the folks that are providing you education online, whoever that is. And yeah, I hope you join me again for future esoterica content in the future. So again, thank you, Kirsten, for coming on, and I will see folks later on. I appreciate you listening in, and thank you.
Thank you for listening.